Chapter 724. Dinner Break. Dake went to Professor Shi Erfu's office. After he came to this conclusion, he didn't immediately look for Professor Shi Erfu. However, he didn't expect Professor Shi Erfu to look for him first. The black tea in his hand was steaming, and the sweet aroma filled his mouth. Dake put down the teacup and heard Professor Shi Erfu ask, "What do you think about the white Gouda?" "So, it's about this?" With this thought in mind, Dark said, "We still need to see." The ability to see through people's minds couldn't see through the second consciousness. If he wanted to understand the white Gouda's second consciousness, the best way was to force it out. And now, there was an opportunity in front of him. Both sides didn't confirm this because they both thought the other side was aware of it. Remember, https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP Professor Sylph tapped her fingers and said, "Tonight, you have to be serious." Dirk was slightly startled, then revealed a slight smile. Of course. After observing the last two duels of the Silver Cup, he had a rough understanding of the behavior pattern of the second consciousness. He was confident that he could force it out. However, Professor Shi Erfu looked up and said, "I know what you're thinking. Ka Zayer is a good person." Dake paused for a second because of the big difference between Professor Shi Erfu's words. Professor Shi Erfu smirked and said, "He's not good at searching." Dake pondered for a long time before he realized what Professor Shi Erfu meant. She was implying that Professor Ka Zayer wasn't an RPG protagonist and wouldn't search. In other words, the white Gouda was hiding a lot of things. Professor Shi Erfu said slowly, "After all, this person is a white, and Ophelia is here, so we can't go too far." Dake said, "I've been thinking about the purpose of the third party helping Angus Jeffrey. Let's not talk about this for now. Since this is the premise, it means that the third party participated in Angus Jeffrey's experiment in the secret tunnel. If Victor really is the third party, then the possibility of him having even more high-star magic elves, especially demon creatures, is very high." Professor Shi Erfu nodded and said, "In general, you can consider that he has another deck." "I understand." Dake nodded. Professor Shi Erfu was being so tactful, to remind him to be serious. To avoid failure. After that, the two sides communicated in simple terms and reached a tacit agreement. In fact, he was already prepared to do what Professor Shi Erfu wanted him to do. When Dark walked out of the vice principal's office, he suddenly realized that the purpose of the third party helping Angus Jeffrey was probably just to take advantage of him. Although this reason seemed too simple, it was very likely to be the case. After all, Angus Jeffrey was indeed a rich man. In the evening, the cafeteria of Shangmalian Academy was very lively. The development of the final day of the Silver Cup was unexpected, but the real hot topic was the challenge that the White Gouda issued to Dake Dimeng during the championship interview. Regardless of whether it was the juniors or seniors, they were all tirelessly discussing this hot topic during the meal break. The White Gouda is indeed the hero's son. Some people sighed. They were not sarcastic at all. I wonder how far the White Gouda can go. Some people were confused, but some were hopeful. I really want to see Dake Dimeng's expression. Is he in the cafeteria right now? Some people were excited and snickered in their hearts. In the area where the first-year students gathered, because the first-year students hadn't received a Christmas gift from the mathematics teaching assistant, they were very displeased with their professor being provoked in public. Not to mention the Noble Academy, which was already at odds with the Knight Academy, and the Sorcerer Academy, which was just defeated by the Knight Academy. Even the Knight Academy students were a little unhappy. The hero's son is really strong, but why does he think he can compete with our professor? Spike Leon said while eating meat. That's right, a junior mage from the Knight Academy said. Our professor didn't participate in the Silver Cup competition because he didn't want to bully them, right? The girl on the other side also said from afar. Therefore, the topic was filled with condemnation of the Silver Cup champion. Compared to the first-year students' preference for Dake Dimeng, the atmosphere among the second-year students was even weirder. Although the second-year students of the Knight Academy cheered loudly after the White Gouda championship, after calming down, they were a little embarrassed. Of course, on the surface, they had to support White. After all, White had just won the collective honor for them, so they did not want to pour cold water on him. However, when they were cheering him on, they did not mean what they said. As the discussion continued, the atmosphere between them became more and more serious. The students of the Night Academy were courageous and were not afraid of challenges. After accepting the fact that White had challenged Dake, they started to think about how to help White win. However, the effect was not very obvious. White was in the middle of it all, and his face was also serious. The pressure from the surroundings and inside of him was slowly accumulating. Before the duel even started, he seemed to have entered the zone. Dake came to the cafeteria later. After picking up his plate and choosing his favorite food, he walked to the area where there were more second-year students. Then, he saw Anna raising her hand and shouting, "Dake, Dake, here, here." Anna was still holding a greasy fork in her hand. Luo Si quickly patted her arm down and reminded her to pay attention to her manners. Dake walked over quickly and found that Doran, Pitan, and Eudora were also in front of the table for 6 people. 5 people were missing one, so he could make up for it. Doran and Pitan laughed happily as if the depression of the afternoon had all disappeared. They felt very comfortable. Dake sat down and chatted with them. Not long after, the second-year students of the Magic Academy came over to cheer him on, which made him a little surprised. Of course, not everyone was optimistic about Dark's chances. Werther God had improved significantly in every duel, especially in the last half of the finals. His performance was amazing. Among the senior students, many students who had lost to Dake in the Golden Cup competition were talking about the example of a brave man had a breakthrough in the face of danger. They felt that White Gouda had a chance. A brave man was invincible. While they were discussing, someone would often interrupt them. "Have you all forgotten about Angus Jeffrey?" The 5th-year Angus Jeffrey had been knocked down by Dake Dimming not long ago. But after such a short period of time, he seemed to have been forgotten. The sunset glow on the horizon was like a surging wave. Outside the St. Marian's dueling hall in the capital, new carriages drove in one after another. The finals of the Silver Cup, in the second year, didn't attract these people, but after the final interview spread, it attracted these people. Although Yvette was busy with work, it was already night time. In theory, work at night was considered overtime. If she wanted to, it wasn't hard for her to find time. Not to mention, she was only here to watch a duel. She could even have dinner in the hall in an instant. Along with her was Janice from the Palace of Pisces. Recently, she had been busy with work and didn't have Claire by her side, so Janice, who was bored to death, was pulled in. On the other side, eldest Prince Charles, who was very interested in the Valkyrie's son and the brave man's son, also appeared in a corner of the audience with Archbishop Caleb Norris. Eldest Princess Elisha didn't come. But one of the 32 counselors, Count Geoffrey, came after hearing the news. Count Geoffrey finally paid attention to Dake Dimming, who had defeated his son multiple times in duels. Thinking of Angus, who had been hiding in a corner after receiving treatment at home, Count Geoffrey's face was a little gloomy. Although after a detailed investigation, he already knew that Dake had never deliberately targeted Angus. Angus was his son after all. He wouldn't target Dake, but he was already thinking about how to denounce the Shang Malian Academy. The Shang Malian Academy was a reasonable place. And now, he was in the right. "Let me take a good look at the quality of our vet's family's baby." He crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair, his face gloomy. Not long after, someone came to his ear to report. He suddenly turned his head and saw the eldest prince, who was talking to the Archbishop, and Yvette, who was buying model eggs after dinner. Yvette didn't have any special purpose. After hearing about this matter, she just came to watch a duel to comfort herself. But eldest Prince Charles and Archbishop Caleb Norris were a little different. Although the duel between Dake and Angus had been forgotten by many, it had already attracted the attention of the saint. But because Count Geoffrey was a hardcore supporter of the eldest prince, the saint hadn't looked into it. But the undercurrent was already surging. No one would have thought that a mere Golden Cup competition would attract so much attention. It was just an unintentional move, but the Duel Club, which had arranged this competition, was also a little speechless. But this competition had indeed started, and it was under the attention of countless people, whether it was in the open or in the dark. 7:30 p.m. After Dake Dimeng re-entered the open-air duel arena, he waved goodbye to Anna and the others, and then walked straight into the contestants' passage. Not long after, he sat down in a contestants' lounge and began to build a deck. Although it was not far from the start of the competition, he already had a plan in his heart, and building a deck from scratch would not take too much time. Under such circumstances, among the magic guide fairies that had already entered the stadium in groups, some of the magic guide fairies that had been selected disappeared one by one. The first to disappear was the pink rabbit, followed by the pink rabbit, followed by the pink rabbit, and then the pink rabbit again. With enough Elysium magic elven cards, Dake was able to build a complete Elysium series of cards. After he had completed the construction, he began to replenish the mana of the magic elven cards that were not full of mana. As the mana slowly flowed into the cards, his soul was also gradually calming down. It's time to get serious. Although he was using the Elysium series of cards. On the other side, White Gouda also found a contestants' lounge and sat down. Because there were not many matches in the arena that night, there was no one around him. He sat on the edge of the windowsill, looking up at the scene outside the window. His gaze swept across the crowd of spectators, and his eyes flashed frequently, sometimes clear, sometimes dark. White Gouda was not completely unaware of his own situation. But the information he knew was limited. Even if he felt a little strange, he would only think that he was not feeling well or something else. Phew! After taking a deep breath of the cold night air, White Gouda put his hand into the card bag and prepared to make the final adjustments to the deck. After releasing his emotions after winning the championship, he had now completely calmed down. The mountain-like pressure was completely on his shoulders, and his forehead was sweating. When he was about to challenge Dake, he realized that Dake's image in his heart was so tall and unsurpassable. But he would not be crushed by this pressure. Climb the peak. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the duel arena of St. Marian Academy. Although Judy still has a lot of things to say to you, I think that you, like Judy, can't wait for the upcoming duel to begin. So, to make a long story short, this Gold Cup points competition, no, the Silver Cup follow-up competition officially begins. Senior Judy's voice spread to every corner of the duel arena. She deliberately made her tone sound excited and said loudly, "Let's welcome the champion of the Silver Cup, White Gouda." The applause instantly thundered. Under the guidance of the staff, White Gouda walked out of the contestant tunnel and stepped onto the red team's platform. Then, the lights fell on his body, and a huge projection appeared. The cheers of the audience became louder and louder. He had accumulated a lot of popularity this afternoon. Then, Senior Judy said loudly again, "Next up is our second-year champion, Dake Dimeng." Then, Senior Judy said loudly again, "Next up is our second-year champion, Dake Dimeng." Chapter 725. With Dake Dimeng's official appearance, the White Gouda's voice dropped significantly. Although the White Gouda's popularity had soared today, it was still lacking compared to the popularity that Dake Dimeng had accumulated over a long period of time. I know that Dake gave up the Silver Cup, but how did the two of them meet? Yalvet turned sideways and whispered to Janice. She was happy because of her baby's popularity, but there were some things that needed to be clarified. I heard that it was the White Gouda who initiated the challenge after winning the championship. Janice didn't know the details. The two of them only knew that Dake would appear at night, so they took the time to come and watch. Seeing her baby's heroic appearance on the duel stage healed Yalvet's heart, and the tiredness caused by her busy work dissipated. But today's matter seemed to have something else to eat. She smiled as she spoke. She was looking forward to this duel more and more. Website https://m Vipcanshu. VIP. On the other hand, Prince Charles and Archbishop Caleb Norris were discussing Angus Jeffrey's situation. Although Angus Jeffrey's incident didn't become a big deal on the surface, the people who should know already knew. If he wasn't Earl Jeffrey's son, he would have been interrogated by the Holy Church. But the root of the incident was still in the Shang Malian Academy. The archbishop raised his head and narrowed his eyes. He frowned as if he could see through the sky of the Shangmalian Academy. The Shangmalian Academy was shrouded in a fog. Ai Ma and Sarah sat in their own small groups and raised their heads to look at the arena. There was no joy in their expressions, but the people around them were gritting their teeth. They were probably drawing circles and cursing the white Gouda. Dolong, Pitten, Luo Si, Diana, and the others were waving flags and shouting in the direction of Dake, as if they were competing with the audience. On the other side, some of the second-year students of the Night Academy were competing with them. Under the night sky, between the stars and the moon, youth was just right. Dake Dimeng pressed his hand on the card table and injected some magic into it to activate the card table. Then, the magic projection enlarged his upper body and his facial expression became clearer. At this moment, he raised his head and looked across, his gaze falling on Werther. What made him feel a little surprised was that, under such circumstances, Victor actually calmed down, and did not raise his hands to interact with the audience like he was used to. Doc's eyes darted around, wondering if this was Victor's own will or the interference of the second consciousness. But at this moment, when the audience's cheers quieter, the audience's voice, suddenly, he said, "I thought that I would have the confidence to challenge you at least until the end of the second year or third year." Doc gently knocked on the table, but did not interrupt. White paused and continued, "I didn't expect to win the championship today. But the moment I won, I knew that it was just the beginning. If I can't defeat you, what's the point of winning the championship?" Dake frowned and finally said, "Isn't it good to be the champion of the Silver Cup? This is your improvement. You have to be realistic and don't bite off more than you can chew." The moment he spoke, he sounded like he was educating someone. Maybe it was because he had been an assistant for half a year. White Gouda was very sensitive to this. He frowned and wanted to say something like, "Are you teaching me how to do things?" But before he could say it, he bit his tongue. After a long while he said slowly, "You're always like this. As if everyone was a generation younger than you. We're all students of the same grade. Why are you superior and talk like an elder? Today, I'm going to pull you down from the altar." Finally, he squeezed out the words from his lips. "Altar? I'm not God." Dake shook his head slowly and said, "We're not here today. The reason why you and I are standing here today is not because of any other reason. It's because the system of the Golden Cups points competition just happened to randomly pick you and me. As the last duel of the second year in the dueling hall, I hope that no matter if it's you or me, there will be no regrets." His tone was calm, and he wasn't angry at White's aggressiveness. However, White suddenly said, "Don't teach me." He didn't shout, but his tone was terrifyingly low. The corners of Doc's mouth curled up, revealing a meaningful smile. The conversation between the two ended there. Dake didn't argue, and White lost his chance to speak again. However, the atmosphere between the two was like a knife and a sword. There was no turning back. The battle was about to begin. "Players, take your positions." Senior Sister Judy's voice rose. Doc and Werther took out the cards from their card packs at the same time and slowly put them into the card slots. Then, the card table shuffled automatically. The words, "Preparation Stage," appeared on top of the table. The atmosphere became more and more tense. Everyone realized that the duel had entered its final countdown. The referee who decided the countdown had a solemn expression. The two commentators who were in charge of the Silver Cup went on stage and explained. They were going to explain the extra meaning of the Golden Cup points competition. On the red team's stage. On the blue team's stage. Victor and Dark faced each other from a distance, their eyes looking straight ahead. Their fingers touched the top of the shuffled deck. Beep! At that moment, the referee's whistle pierced the night sky. The moon and stars in the night sky shone brighter at that moment. Preparation stage. 30s. Both players drew their cards at the same time when the 30s countdown appeared. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. With 5 cards in hand, both players passed the cards to their left hand and spread them out like a peacock spreading its tail. From then on, their movements and pace were almost exactly the same. But in the twinkling of an eye, the two players stepped onto completely different paths. Dake didn't look at White's expression anymore. He focused on the 5 cards in his hand. The Bliss card set that he put together temporarily wasn't perfect. Whether it was the individual cards or the system, there were major flaws. However, he still managed to form a team and bring it to this duel. Since that was the case, he would use this card set as a foundation to fight White Gouda with all his might. There were 2 purposes for this experiment. One was to test the card set. The other was to test White. Dake's mind quickly calmed down. He didn't think about these outside matters anymore. No matter what, White Gouda was an opponent worth beating. This was a pleasant surprise. His gaze swept across the cards in his hand, and all 5 cards entered his eyes. Fairy Tale Animal, Rabbit, Bliss 3, Moon, Magic Beast, Ever-Changing Monster, Milk Can, Laughing Mask, 3 Magic Elf cards, 1 Magic card, and 1 item card. A very well-balanced combination. In short, this obviously isn't a Joker card. Dake's gaze fell on the Fairy Tale Animal, Rabbit. It was a little surprising that he was able to draw it in the first round. Not only was this not a Joker card, but it was also a sign of good luck. Fairy Tale Animal, Rabbit's existence was extremely good at stabilizing the bottom line of the opening round. Moreover, in addition to having a high defense that even the first-tier Magic Elf couldn't break, Fairy Tale Animal, Rabbit, was also a very special Magic Elf card. By activating Summon Friends, Dake could summon any bird or beast Magic Elf that wasn't higher than 3 stars from his hand or card set. In this way, Bliss 3, Moon, could be used not only on Magic Beast, Ever-Changing Monster. Whether it was Magic Beast, Ibu, Dream Demon, Demon Fox, Black Big Ear Beast, Curly Ear Beast, Moon God Beast, they were all excellent choices. There were too many strategies that could be derived from this. There were too many to count. Before Dake's train of thought became muddled, he decisively stopped thinking. Then, he drew Fairy Tale Animal, Rabbit, from his hand and was ready to go. Through the magic projection, the audience outside the arena could see the face of the Magic Elf card that he drew from his hand. However, from White's angle, they couldn't see it at all. Relying on this method, the audience could predict the strategies of both players in advance, if they had enough understanding of the cards of both players. What is that? Yvette's eyes widened in surprise. She was very clear about every Magic Elf card that Dake had used in the duel. However, the Magic Elf card that was drawn in front of her was undoubtedly something that had never appeared before. Moreover, the pink rabbit depicted on this Magic Elf card was really cute, and not threatening enough. She liked this Magic Elf very much. Of course, if it wasn't a pink rabbit but a pink catworm, she would like it even more. 2-star, Earth type, attack, 0, defense, 2100. At the same time, countless astonished voices sounded in the hearts of the audience. Many people couldn't help but exclaim out loud. Although one couldn't judge a book by its cover and the pink rabbit couldn't be measured, the soft fur of the pink rabbit on the card could support a defense of 2100 points? Is it because of its size? Although it's hard to tell from the card, could it be that this Magic Elf is actually the type that has a huge body? Ophelia couldn't help but ponder. Although Blood Maiden was a little worried about her child, of course, she hoped that her child could win. She was on White's side. Other than being a little fat, I can't see anything else. Hephaestus opened her mouth and slightly revealed the tip of her tongue as she giggled. On the red side's platform, White Gouda had already picked out a Magic Elf card from the deck and was counting down silently. After that, both sides raised their heads and looked at each other. White Gouda suddenly noticed that Dake Diming's face was gradually breaking into a smile. His heart suddenly tightened, and his pupils shrank inwards. A trace of an ominous premonition appeared in his heart at the beginning of the match. Tick. Then, the sound of the round changing entered his ears. Preparation stage. Battle stage. The atmosphere of the competition instantly became tense. Both sides were like track and field athletes who had started running in an instant, tightly grasping the time to cast their usual summoning spells. Their voices were loud. In the name of Dake Dimeng, magic summoning, fairy tale animal, little rabbit. In the name of White Gouda, magic summoning, ox head axeman. 3 seconds later, 2 summoning lights landed on the 2 sides of the summoning area. There wasn't much suspense in the starting summoning of this duel. Whether it was Dake or White, they both chose to start with a magic elf card. But when the 2 magic elves appeared, the contrast between the 2 sides became obvious. The audience who guessed that fairy tale animal, little rabbit, was very likely to be a giant rabbit that was the complete opposite of the little in the card's name were all slapped in the face at this moment, and their faces were filled with astonishment. The fairy tale animal, little rabbit, standing in the blue side summoning area was surprisingly smaller and more harmless than they had imagined. Hey! Under the astonished gazes of thousands of people, the pink-furred rabbit, who was standing on its 2 legs, raised its 2 short little hands, and then very clumsily and slowly turned a circle. After this circle, a tree stump slowly rose from under its feet, lifting its body up. It suddenly lost its balance and sat on the tree stump with a heavy butt. Meow. The fairy tale animal, little rabbit, was obviously nervous. Although it had held its head high and boasted shamelessly when it was surrounded by the magic elves, it was actually just a baby rabbit that had just been born not long ago. It had never seen such a big scene at all, so it was very, very normal for it to feel nervous after being the first to appear. Omega. Meow. That's right, very, very, very normal. The fairy tale animal, little rabbit, shyly covered its eyes and chose to deceive itself. A 2-star magic elven? Does it have some special ability? Looking at the little rabbit that sat on the ground, the corners of White Gouda's mouth twitched, but his heart instantly became alert and vigilant. Roar! The magic elven that he had summoned with his hand let out an angry roar at this moment. Card name, Oxhead Axeman. Type, Elven card. Level, Race, Bird Beast. Attribute, Combat. Magic power, 1600. Attack, 1700. Defense, 400. Ultimate skills, Black Iron Axe, Whirlwind Slash, Fatal Throw. White Gouda's magic elven card had already undergone a huge revolution. His Oxhead Axeman was made with the Minotaur's horn as the core material, and it had a terrifying strength that surpassed the troll. Other than its slightly weaker defense, the Oxhead Axeman's charm and attack were extremely strong, and it could be said to be a complete 3-star magic elven card. The Oxhead Axeman was still a bird beast. Although it stood like a human, its legs were still cow's legs, and its 2 hooves were firmly planted on the ground. Only its hands had 5 fingers. Its body was huge, and it was more than 2 meters tall, and there was a thick nose ring in its nostrils. The Oxhead Axeman was naked and did not have any armor, but the giant axe in its hand was terrifyingly dark, and it emitted a faint smell of blood. It was originally an extremely ferocious magic elven, and in front of the cute pink rabbit opposite it, its ferocious temperament was set off to become even more ferocious. Attack. Although the White Gouda was vigilant, it still blew the horn to attack. The Oxhead Axeman was already impatient. Its upper body leaned forward, and its center moved forward. Its 2 hooves suddenly swung backward, and its entire body suddenly shot out like a giant crossbow. Its sprinting speed was unrecognizable from its appearance. By the time the audience reacted, the Oxhead Axeman had already rushed to the center line. The first round of attacks is about to begin. The unknown commentator let out a sigh. Both players had already picked out their second magic elven card from their hands. When the Oxhead Axeman rushed to the center line, both players had already begun the second round of normal summoning. In the name of Dake Dim Eng, magic elven card summon, fantasy beast, multiform monster. In the name of White Gouda, magic elven card summon, crypt grass. When the summoning sound resounded in the stadium, the Oxhead Axeman had already rushed over. When it approached the blue side summoning area, it once again exerted its strength. Its originally extremely fast speed exploded again, and its body almost turned into a black shadow. The black iron axe in its right hand emitted a black light, and it used all its strength to slash at the fairy tale animal, little rabbit, that was crawling under the tree stump. At that moment, The chubby pink rabbit was lying on the tree stump, and one of its short legs carefully extended to the ground. If one looked closely, one could even see that its calves and stomach were trembling slightly. The tree stump wasn't tall, but climbing from the top to the bottom was still a big challenge for the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit. When the tip of its foot finally touched the ground, the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, immediately caught up with its second foot and finally let out a sigh of relief. However, the shadow had already enveloped it. The black iron axe, which carried a huge amount of kinetic energy, slashed fiercely at the head of the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit. With the latter's reaction speed, it couldn't react at all. The pitch-black and sharp axe blade slashed at the seemingly defenseless rabbit's head just like that. "Poochie! It's broken!" the commentator suddenly exclaimed. The fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit's unreasonable 2,100 points of defense still couldn't block the Oxhead Axeman's attack. The black iron axe passive skill increased its attack by 300 points. After the high-speed kinetic energy was converted, the attack further increased. It used all its strength, and its overall attack exceeded 2,100 points, and finally split open the pink rabbit's scalp. Although this scene was very different from what the white Gouda had imagined, it still broke through the rabbit's defense. And once the defense was broken, the Oxhead Axeman only needed to stare at the wound and attack again to deal fatal damage to the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit. In the summoning area of both contestants, two new magic spirits appeared at the same time. Phantasmal Beast, multiform monster, summoned by Dark Diamond, stood guard in front of the blue cube magic ball. The Crypt Plant, summoned by the white Gouda, immediately dived into the ground. The Crypt Plant was a monster exclusive to the dungeon. It was a plant species, a ground species, and a grass species. Its three measurements weren't high, but it could drill into the ground and transform itself into a crypt trap that was difficult to identify on the surface. Once a creature stepped on it, it would suddenly open its mouth and swallow the creature. The defense of its mouth was stronger than its skin. The liquid that seeped out from the surface could dissolve gold and iron into water. It was a very, very dangerous monster. The Crypt Plant, created by the white Gouda, was a special one. It was a gold card. After the Crypt Plant drilled into the ground under the red magic ball, 3 deep crypts appeared one after another near the red summoning area. Then, they closed in the blink of an eye. Then, the red magic ball was swallowed into the first crypt of the Crypt Plant. The Crypt Plant of the white Gouda could split into 2 new plants underground and transform into 3 crypts. Moreover, it could move. Therefore, after it swallowed the magic ball, it could provide relatively good defense. It could be said that it had both offensive and defensive capabilities. Of course, it wasn't as difficult to deal with as Angus Jeffrey's Crypt Plant. After all, it didn't completely dive into the ground. As long as it found the right location, it could directly attack the main body. But at this moment, no one was paying attention to this very powerful gold card. Everyone's gazes were attracted to the fierce battle that was taking place in the blue team's summoning area. When the Oxhead Axeman realized that his full-strength axe only split open the pink rabbit's scalp, he swung his axe a second time with a furious roar. Although this axe didn't have the support of kinetic energy, his hands were very steady. He really aimed at the wound that had been split open. However, his vision blurred, and the bloody wound disappeared into thin air. Then, the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, who was sitting on the ground, screamed and lifted the heavy tree stump with all its strength, blocking it like a shield above its head. Puff! The axes collided, and it was like hitting cotton wool. The Oxhead Axeman didn't hold back at all because of the sudden disappearance of the wound. He still used all his strength with this axe. However, the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit's defense was 360 degrees without any blind spots. The black iron axe couldn't even leave a mark on the tree stump. However, after being hit twice in a row, the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, couldn't successfully use Call Friends. Calling friends was actually a necessary condition to activate. If the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, didn't immediately summon it after it fell from the tree stump, it would lose the possibility of summoning it. If it wanted to try again, it would need to climb up the tree stump and come down, and so on. This wasn't a big problem for the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit. It was just that it could only hug the tree and squat down, and it couldn't use it. Seeing this, Dake slightly frowned. His finger didn't move from Bliss 3 Moon for a long time. He didn't let the fantasy beast 100 Faces transform into the Oxhead Axeman, because transformation had a cooldown. Although the Oxhead Axeman was very strong, it wasn't a good choice. Instead, if he used Bliss 3 Moon to upgrade the fantasy beast 100 Faces to 6 stars, it would be able to solve the current predicament. But this way, it would consume another Bliss 3 Moon. There were only 5 Bliss cards in his Bliss card set. Every time he used one, there would be one less. Moreover, the fantasy beast 100 Faces in front of him didn't have any intelligence. His thoughts were very complicated. But in a magician duel where every second counted, he needed to make a quick decision. After a few seconds of contemplation, Doc raised the Bliss 3 Moon card in his hand and summoned it with a loud voice. In the name of Dake Dimming, I summon Bliss 3 Moon. Pink light bloomed. Whirlwind slash. The white Gouda's roar was heard before Dake started his third summon. After the roar, the Oxhead Axeman actually took a step back. It raised its left hand and grabbed the end of the black iron axe's long handle. It changed from one hand to two. Then, it stomped on the ground, twisted its waist, and suddenly spun in a circle. In just one circle, a storm surged out. The violent airflow rose from the bottom and gathered on the black iron axe, making the axe blade sharper and pushing the speed of the axe to suddenly increase. Ah! The Oxhead Axeman's furious roar rose to the sky. All the audience members who were watching realized that this axe would definitely cut off the fat rabbit's scalp. Although the fairy tale animal rabbit's defense was high, it only had 1,000 mana points. When its scalp was cut open by the first axe, it must have been damaged. If this whirlwind slash, which was even more powerful, hit its target, it would be killed on the spot. Although it was a little funny to use all of one's strength to kill a pink rabbit, the winner was the loser. As long as it was a successful kill, there was nothing to be embarrassed about. At this moment, whether it was the audience members, the White Gouda, or the Oxhead Axeman with intelligence level 2.0, they all thought the same. This whirlwind slash, with terrifying power, did indeed break through the fairy tale animal rabbit's defense. On the surface of the tree stump, there was an extremely long cut. The tree stump and the fairy tale animal rabbit were almost one. Since the tree stump was broken, it was equivalent to the fairy tale animal rabbit's defense being broken. From Dake's perspective, he could clearly determine that this whirlwind slash's attack was close to 2,500 points, and it almost killed the fairy tale animal rabbit on the spot. Then, 1 second later, under the gaze of countless people, the cut on the tree stump surface healed in the blink of an eye as if it had never existed. This scene caused everyone to be stunned. Even those Magus tutors with higher standards couldn't understand this mere 2-star pink furry rabbit. Oxhead Axeman, fatal throw. The White Gouda's voice sounded again, and there was anxiety in his tone. Dake could clearly sense that he was anxious. In the first round of this duel, White Gouda encountered an accident that he could never have imagined. He had originally come here with the momentum of being the champion, and the path he walked was one of indomitable will. Now that this path was blocked by a harmless pink rabbit, he didn't even have the thought of having the Minotaur Hatchet Man attack the magic ball. The only thing left in his mind at this moment was the urge to slash the rabbit in half. A black tide gushed out from the depths of his eyes. Ah! The Oxhead Axeman's roar had already reached the point of hysteria. That pink-furred rabbit was clearly trembling under its crotch, but in its heart, it suddenly felt a huge sense of powerlessness. However, that sure-kill skill, fatal throw, was still fully used. At that moment, its huge body leaped high into the air as if it had grown a pair of wings. The black iron axe, in its hands, rotated at a high speed along with the execution of its ultimate skill. Then, It hacked down fiercely at the little rabbit who was hugging the tree and squatting in the house below with extreme ferocity. This axe had already surpassed the limits of the magic guiding fairies of the first tier. Even some second-tier magic guide fairies couldn't withstand such a terrifying attack. The power of the huge axe falling from the sky was so fierce that it made people speechless. The audience outside the arena had experienced a few roller coasters of emotions in this short period of time. When they saw the power of the fatal throw, this time, they couldn't help but think, this time, it's going to die, right? Whoosh! The storm howled. The huge axe cut open the tree stump. The remaining power of the axe grazed the fairy tale animal, little rabbit scalp. The fairy tale animal, little rabbit, raised its chubby little face in shock. After its beloved tree stump was cut in half, the night sky above its head came into view. The weather tonight was very good, and the stars were so bright. After the black iron huge axe's remaining power dissipated, it tilted to the side. Then, before it tilted 45 degrees, it suddenly turned into scattered starlight. Fatal throw, the enemy's life, was also its own life. The ox-head axeman was destroyed. Dead. Bang! White Gouda smashed the card table fiercely. The pressure that had accumulated since the start of the game made his forehead sweat. He could bear the price of the ox-head axeman, but the pink-furred rabbit that suffered the fatal throw only looked up at the sky with a dazed expression. Then, it put the tree stump that had been cut in half together. Fight, fight. F***CK. While he was shocked and angry, the audience outside the arena was already in an uproar. In the first 30 seconds of the first round, the two-star pink-furred rabbit was like a magnet, firmly grabbing the attention of everyone inside and outside the arena. The two shoutcasters were so shocked that they fell silent. Whether it was the White Gouda or Dake Dimming himself, they didn't do anything during that period. After Dake upgraded Fantasy Beast, ever-changing monster, to 6-star, he also stopped moving. The cool breeze of the night blew over. After the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, realized that the fierce-looking black bull had mysteriously disappeared, although its mind was in a mess, it didn't forget the order that Dake had given it at the beginning. Therefore, when everyone was stunned, it was the only one that was still determined. It placed the tree stump back on the ground and climbed up with a whoosh 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 sound. It let out a light sigh, moved backward, and with one foot touching the ground first, it climbed down again. The cute action of climbing up and down was confusing. White Gouda felt humiliated. However, the sound of the round changing made him suddenly wake up from the edge of losing his rationality. He almost subconsciously pulled out 2 new magic cards from the deck, and then the expression on his face quickly calmed down. No. He realized that there was something wrong with his mentality. Although that mere 2-star pink furry rabbit had indeed made him feel humiliated, the truth was that from the start till now, he had only lost a 3-star magic elven card. Everything had just begun, and there wasn't much to speak of. What made him so easily waver was the pressure of facing Dake Dimming. He immediately took a deep breath and pulled out a new magic card from the deck. Summoning Magic Elven Card. White has stabilized. Ophelia Bullard clenched her fists and heaved a sigh of relief. She wasn't the kind of person who would be shocked by such a small matter, but she had already completely adapted to her identity as a mother, and there was nothing she could do. In the audience outside the arena, Yvette was laughing quite happily. How strong could a 2-star magic elven card be? Her baby seemed to be using facts to explain this matter. She saw the shadow of the Phoenix Girl on the pink furry rabbit. On the blue team's platform. Dake didn't know whether to laugh or cry in his heart. He actually didn't understand why White was so against a poor, cute, and helpless little rabbit, and even gave it a 3-star magic elven card for no reason. The Oxhead Axeman's last attack was very powerful, and the combined attack was even more than 3,000 points. After taking that attack, the magic of fairy tale animal Little Rabbit was only left with an insignificant trace. However, it was still lacking in the end. Just a little bit less damage was equivalent to a complete waste of effort. It was really regrettable. Dake looked at the new magic card he had obtained. Zoo, cute beast. When he was forming the Bliss deck, because of the lack of magic cards, he added zoo, after thinking for a while. Of course, this was not just a stopgap measure. In fact, the magic elves in the Bliss deck were almost all birds and beasts. Zoo could be used to make up for the lack of a venue card. As for Cute Beast, since he had drawn it, it naturally had its uses. Dake looked at Milk Can in his hand. In the previous duels, he basically didn't add Milk Can into the deck. However, in this Bliss deck, he even added Ball Sea Lion into it. This naturally made the deck less coordinated when using it, but after all, he didn't have that many magic cards to choose from. Moreover, increasing the difficulty would help him find a smile in the duel. Dake lightly tapped Laughing Mask on the leftmost side, thinking about how to use it. At the same time, without much hesitation, he took out Zoo, raised it, and summoned. In the name of Dake Dim-Eng, magic summoning, Zoo. Before the summoning was successful, in the blue summoning area, beside Fairy Tale Animal, Little Rabbit, there was already a furry brown cutie. That was the 3-star magical fantasy beast, Ibu. Using Fairy Tale Animal, Little Rabbit as Summon Friends to summon magical fantasy beast, Ibu, was the most basic tactic. When hesitating and unable to decide which partner to summon, magical fantasy beast, Ibu, was the most comprehensive choice. Using one magical fantasy beast, Ibu, to exchange for 2 other magical fantasy beast, Ibu, was also a complete set of tactics. However, considering that Receive the Baton could only be used once, in fact, it was very wasteful to summon all 3 magical fantasy beast, Ibu. Therefore, magical fantasy beast, Ibu, did not move at this time. At this time, Zoo was finally successfully summoned. Venue spread. Radiance descended. The magic veins were like a tidal wave, gushing wildly in all directions. Dake raised the Zoo magic card in his hand, constantly emitting rays of light. The ground was covered by a net of magic power in the blink of an eye. The buildings belonging to the Zoo rose from the ground under the effect of the true projection. Starting from the blue side of the summoning zone, the buildings spread out rapidly, rushing toward the red side of the opposite zone with the momentum of a tidal wave. Having just completed a summoning, White Gouda's expression changed slightly, and he felt a little anxious again. In the middle of his summoning zone, there was a metal cylinder engraved with strange totems. It wasn't a building, nor was it a prop, but a kind of magic creature born in the underground city. Totem monster. There were many types of totem monsters. They were a type of machine, but they encompassed almost all types of attributes. A totem monster with the fire attribute could breathe fire, a totem monster with the water attribute could breathe water, and so on. White Gouda's totem monster was of the dark attribute. It only had one sure kill skill, Enchantment of Darkness. Totem monster spread the enchantment. Seeing that the magic network of the Zoo was about to completely invade the red side of the zone, White quickly gave the order. The huge metal cylinder, which was 3 meters tall, was cut into 3 sections and slowly rotated. The Enchantment of Darkness, which emitted a dark aura, started to spread out with it as the center. But it didn't clash with the Zoo. The whole place still became a paradise for birds and beasts. Good morning, 10,000 words chapter. I'm looking for guaranteed monthly votes and guaranteed blades. Watch me write another 10,000 words. Bliss card set, free words, elf card frowny face curse cage, little evil magic beast, curse cage, sub-ancient beast, for all, fairy tale animal, little rabbit, for all, cute beast, for all, ball sea lion, for all, magic beast, Ibu, for all X3, magic beast, ever-changing monster, for all X3, dream demon, for all demon fox beast, for all black big-eared beast, for all curly ear, for all moon god beast, for all big milk jar, for all fairy Ibu, for all death god's coffin, for all dolong baluto, for all minus, for all magic card frowny face bliss. 3. Bliss 3 Moon, X3, Bliss 3 Moon, Pride, Zoo, Flight Spell, Underworld Soul Ring, Items Frowny Face Moon God Soul Eye, Light Messenger, Moon God Soul Eye, Moon Pendant, War Horn, Radiant Night Pearl, Moon God Stone, Fairy Puppet, Bronze Snake Mirror, Laughing Mask. Chapter 726. Even though Zoo wasn't as big as Paradise, it was still a venue card that took up a lot of space. A mere 80 by 120 space was naturally unable to accommodate all of them. Therefore, when Dake unfolded Zoo, he could choose a location to cover the area. With the blue summoning area as the boundary, there was a stone wall that protected the blue summoning area. Then, there was a winding road with a dense cluster of short trees in the middle of the area. In the red area, there was a pond pavilion. When the pond spread out, it actually forced the crypt grass out. Even though the crypt grass was a grass-type plant, its secondary attribute was the ground type. Grass subdued water, and water subdued earth. The crypt grass lived in the dark and dry areas of the dungeon and didn't have an affinity with water. In the blink of an eye, the dark enchantment released by the totem monster spread over and covered a small part of the red area. The crypt grass immediately retreated into the dark enchantment and quickly dived back into the dry area. First website. https://m. Vipkanshu. VIP, but in the process, there were obvious signs of corrosion on its leaves. This made Dake immediately realize that the dark enchantment released by the totem monster was harmful. The crypt grass drilled back into the ground and successfully avoided the damage. Dake's eyes flashed, and he quickly said, "Ibu, receive the baton, Lunar God Beast." The effects of the dark enchantment were actually quite varied, but most of them had negative effects such as corrosion and weakening. They also rejected the light attribute and had an affinity with the dark attribute. In Dake's deck, the only dark attribute magical spirits that belonged to the first tier were the Lunar God Beast and the Curse Cage, Little Devil Beast. Without a Great Sin card, the Curse Cage, Little Devil Beast couldn't withstand a single blow. Naturally, he could only rely on the Lunar God Beast. Squeak. As Illusory Beast, Ibu, let out a soft cry, its body turned into light in the blink of an eye and returned to the magic card. The Lunar God Beast, holding its head, drilled out of the vortex where it was originally. Although the Moon God Beast was based on a rabbit, it didn't look like a rabbit at first glance. It raised its head and opened its eyes timidly. Its eyes were red and its two big ears were trembling slightly. But in the next moment, it felt an extremely warm energy being channeled into its body, causing its magic power, attack power, and defense to increase by 200 points at the same time. The Moon God Beast's magic attack and defense was originally 1400/1400/800. With the Zeus effect, it instantly increased to 1600/1600/1000. These three attributes were already quite outstanding among 3-star magic guide fairies. Even when compared to the Ox-Head Hatchet Man, he wasn't any weaker. The soul of the Moon God Beast was comforted, and it raised its head bravely. Dake then gave the order to attack. Thus, this pink rabbit, which didn't look like a rabbit, moved its short legs and rushed toward the other side. Dake continued to summon after 3 seconds. In the name of Dake Diming, I summon the Illusory Beast, Ibu. Yes, he summoned the Illusory Beast, Ibu, once again. And this time, it only took him 2 seconds to summon it. The White Gouda, who was focused on the situation, didn't notice, but some students, professors, and audience members who had some impression of the zoo all recalled the terror of the animal army. A 2-second summon with a 2-second cooldown. Before the Moon God Beast ran into the dark barrier, Dake had already summoned the Adorable Beast. As soon as the Adorable Beast appeared, it immediately shrank behind the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, and looked around cleverly. It knew how to protect itself very well. On the other side, the 6-star Illusory Beast, Changeable Beast, was also ready to attack. Dark's original purpose of raising its star was to fight against the Ox-Head Hatchet Man, but he did not expect that the Ox-Head Hatchet Man would be completely annihilated before the Ox-Head Hatchet Man could make a move. But this was how a magician duel was. Once the decision was made, there was no turning back. He gave a detailed order to the illusory beast, changeable beast, and ordered it to invade the red side and protect the moon god beast from behind. Then, he ordered the illusory beast, Ibu, to stay in the red side and defend together with the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit. With this, the 5 magician fairies in the field all did what they wanted to do and maintained a fairly uniform pace. Dake only had Big Milk Can and Laughing Mask left in his hand. It could be said that he had done all he could. Magician duels usually use the tactic of having multiple players protecting one player. Through all kinds of methods, a super strong core magician fairy could be used to crush the opponent. But sometimes, there would be a battle between 2 armies. At this time, it was necessary to test the duelist's ability to see the big picture and command the team. Dake actually didn't put in much effort to command a team, so he was only slightly better than his peers. After he finished his initial command, he immediately looked at the red side of the field. At this time, the moon god beast had already crossed the center line and rushed to the arched bridge that spanned across the pool. It touched the boundary of the dark barrier. It was very sensitive to the power of darkness, but it didn't hesitate to cross over. The barrier that was supposed to act as a barrier didn't obstruct it, and it entered without any hindrance. This was somewhat unexpected. A special summoning of a dark element magician fairy? White Gouda glanced at the moon god beast, and took out another card from the 4 remaining cards in his hand and loudly chanted. In the name of White Gouda, I summon the Dark Shadow Demonic Leech. After 3 seconds of extreme summoning, White Gouda finally summoned a second-tier magician fairy in the dark barrier. The demonic leech was a flat monster that looked like a leech. They were associated with the totem monsters in the dungeon. In every 10 totem monsters, there would be a demonic leech. Although the demonic leech looked like a worm, it was an elemental type. It was born in various elemental tides and had the corresponding elemental abilities. The totem monsters had high defense, low attack, and extremely slow movement speed. The demonic leech had low defense, high attack, and extremely fast movement speed. They complemented each other perfectly. The Dark Shadow Demonic Leech was an associated monster of the dark element, totem monsters, and could hide in the shadows. Card name, Dark Shadow Demonic Leech. Type, Fairy card. Level, ********. Race, Elemental type. Attribute, Dark element. Magic power, 1800. Attack, 1900. Defense, 100. Ultimate skills, Heart of Shadow, Worm Absorption, Split. This wasn't the first time White Gouda summoned the Dark Shadow Demonic Leech in a duel. Even without the totem monster, the magic guiding fairy could create a high concentration elemental environment and use it as a special summon. After that, its sure kill skill would allow it to become a ladder to summon a higher level star magic guidance sprite. White Gouda was currently using the Dark Element Dungeon series, and the Dark Shadow Demonic Leech was very useful. Of course, when facing a low-level magic guiding fairy, the Dark Shadow Demonic Leech would be the scariest killer. White Gouda's eyes darkened as he ordered the Dark Shadow Demonic Leech to attack the Lunar God Beast. The Dark Shadow Demonic Leech's attack wouldn't be able to break through the Fairy Tale Rabbit, but he didn't think that the Lunar God Beast would have the same defense as the Fairy Tale Rabbit. Since Dake dared to let the magic guiding fairy enter the Dark Ward, Dark Shadow Demonic Leech. The black demonic leech that was only half a meter long silently sneaked into the shadows. Under the Dark Ward as cover, the entire area was filled with shadows. With the Heart of Shadow, the Dark Shadow Demonic Leech could move freely in the shadows, and its speed was extremely fast. However, the Lunar God Beast heard White Gouda's voice, and it became alert. It suddenly stopped moving forward, and its 2 long ears suddenly perked up. Its cute face revealed a panicked expression, and it looked like it was running around in a panic. However, it didn't turn around and run away. Being timid and cowardly was one of its characteristics. However, the nature of the digitized beast and the magic guiding fairy gave it the desire to fight. It tensed up its ears and listened carefully to the sounds around it, trying to catch the Dark Shadow Demonic Leech's tracks. However, the dark shadow demonic leech that was moving around in the shadows didn't make any sound that could be caught until it leaped out of the shadows. At that moment, the dark shadow demonic leech that was hiding behind the lunar god beast turned into a pitch-black arrow and shot toward the back of the lunar god beast's head like a bolt of lightning. The dark shadow demonic leech's 1,900 points of attack power couldn't break through the fairy tale animal's defense, but it could easily tear through the lunar god beast's pink skin. However, in that instant, the petite and adorable magic elf instantly turned around with an astonishing reaction. Its two large ears rotated in a circle like a fan. After which, its crescent-shaped right claw grabbed at the black figure behind it as if it was catching a fish. When it turned around, the pitch-black fog had already climbed up its right claw. Under the cover of this dark energy, the lunar god beast's attack power was increased by 300 points in a short period of time. Bang! The lunar god beast tried to grab the dark shadow demonic leech, but when it was about to get close, it suddenly changed its grip into a slap. The two magic guide fairies clashed for the first time. The moon god beast was forced back by the terrifying force and staggered backward. The dark shadow demonic leech was also sent flying by the slap. The magic power of both sides decreased as a result. Demonic shadow leech, suck. The moment the white Gouda's voice sounded, the dark shadow demon leech touched the ground and disappeared as if it had fallen into water. The moon god beast didn't even have time to adjust its body. The dark shadow demon leech, which had been circling around in the shadows, drilled out from under its feet and bit down on its foot. This was an insect-type sure-kill skill that could absorb the opponent's life force or mana while dealing damage. The mana of the moon god beast began to decrease at a speed visible to the naked eye. Meanwhile, the dark shadow demonic leech's mana was quickly replenished. When its mana exceeded the basic upper limit, the sure-kill skill split was automatically triggered, and a palm-sized, demonic leech split from its body. The demonic leech only had 100 points of mana, and its attack and defense were both 0. However, it could exist as an independent entity and was an excellent sacrifice. After the demonic leeches split up, they scattered like fish and disappeared into the black shadow. Every demonic leech had the sure-kill skill that all shadow creatures knew: shadow concealment. This skill could ensure their survival to the greatest extent. The moon god beast suddenly cried out in pain and tried to lift its leg to break free from the dark shadow demon leech's bite. However, when the dark shadow demon leech used its sure-kill skill suck, the sure-kill skill created an extremely powerful suction force that glued the moon god beast's leg to the ground. The moon god beast couldn't lift its leg at all. Moreover, as its mana was sucked away, the moon god beast felt weak all over and couldn't use any strength. It could only let the dark shadow demon leech continue to suck it away. On the red team's platform, White Gouda finally let out a sigh of relief when he saw this scene. Even if it was the Dake Dimeng, not every magic guide fairy was so powerful that it couldn't be defeated. For example, although the moon god beast in front of him had a combat strength that didn't match its appearance, it was only a 3-star magic guide fairy. It wasn't as scary as the fairy tale animal, rabbit. Just as White Gouda was thinking about this, a pink-white light suddenly descended and landed on the moon god beast's head. The moon god beast suddenly trembled, and the feeling of weakness caused by the loss of mana disappeared in an instant. Its mana that was constantly dropping suddenly rose by a large amount, and it recovered at a rate of 50 mana per second. The moon god beast's expression turned serious, and it quickly lifted the leg that it hadn't bitten and stomped on the dark shadow demon leech fiercely. Poochie! How could the dark shadow demon leech, which only had 100 points of defense, block this angry stomp? It made a prompt decision and let go of its big mouth, but before it could dive back down, its head was crushed by the moon god beast's stomp. Although the dark shadow demon leech wasn't able to fully display its 1,600 points of attack, it was still heavily injured after that stomp. It hid in the shadows and didn't dare to show its head again. However, the dark shadow demon leech had already achieved half of its goal. Insect sucking and split gave birth to a total of 5 demon leeches. Each of these demon leeches could be used as a 1-star offering. If the dark shadow demon leech included itself, it would be a 9-star offering. It would be more than enough to summon a third-tier magic guide fairy of any star rank. White Gouda already had a third-tier magic guide fairy card in his hands from the very beginning of the first round. He used the Dark Barrier's blocking and confusing effect to summon the Dark Shadow Demonic Leech. Then, he split into 5 one-star demonic leeches, and finally gathered enough sacrificial offerings for the summoning ritual. This was originally an open plan. Of course, it would be best if he could destroy the Moon God Beast during this period of time. Even if he couldn't destroy the Moon God Beast, it wouldn't be too bad. At this moment, Werther God had already raised the third-tier magic elven card into the air, and his expression was extremely solemn. As he chanted the sacrificial summoning spell, the strong light released from the magic guide fairy card was mixed with the color of blood. In the name of White Gouda, I sacrifice 1 Dark Shadow Demon Leech, and 4 Demon Leeches, as offerings to summon the Bloody Serpent. He almost gritted his teeth as he chanted the last sentence. Even though the Moon God Beast knew what Dake was going to do after he reminded it, it couldn't do anything to the Demon Leech that was hiding in the shadows. The same was true for the Fantasy Beast, ever-changing monster. The countdown on the projection started to move quickly, and the smell of blood started to fill the air. The smell of blood mixed with the power of darkness, making the red half of the area even more murky. Suddenly, 5 rays of black light shot into the sky from the shadows on the ground, and a ray of red light shot out from the Bloody Serpent. The 6 rays of light met in the air, and under the guidance of the sacrificial summoning spell, they formed a huge and complicated sacrificial summoning array. The Bloody Serpent's ferocious head came out from the sacrificial summoning array. It seemed to be slow, but it was filled with an oppressive aura. Roar! The terrifying roar of the 8-star magic guide fairy finally pulled the audience back to reality. They were still stuck in the previous round. Werther God seemed to want to use this opportunity to tell the audience that fancy things were ultimately useless, and that the third-tier magic elves were the truly powerful ones. The Bloody Serpent's huge body was even taller than the Dark Barrier. The terrifying aura of blood and darkness spread out in all directions. As a student, it is indeed something to be proud of as a second-year student to successfully create an 8-star magic guide fairy card. Dake tapped on the table and said in a calm voice. The speaker on the table prevented his voice from being drowned out by the Bloody Serpent's roar. The White Gouda's rising emotions were cut off by this simple sentence. The veins on his forehead were twitching, and he tried his best to suppress his anger. He reached out his hand and pressed on a magic guide card in his hand. The Bloody Serpent was his trump card in his deck. Around this trump card, he had prepared several ways to strengthen it. At present, there was such a card that had always existed. He just had to wait for the sacrificial summoning spell's cooldown to end, and he could immediately summon it. At this moment, he only had 2 cards left in his hand. However, his summoning was still a little slow. The second round had already passed as the 2 magic guiding fairies tangled with each other. Battle Stage 3. 30s. The duel had entered the third round, and a new variable was about to arrive. The White Gouda clenched his teeth and reached for his cards. The moment he saw the 2 new magic guide cards, the muscles on his cheeks couldn't help but expand. He then chuckled. Come on then. On the blue team's platform, Dake pulled out the 2 new magic guide cards from the top of the deck. He wasn't in a hurry. Dragon Baluto, Magic Gun, Dragon Baluto, could be said to be the highest star-level magic guide card in Dake's deck. Dragon Baluto's star level was 7 stars, and he had enough offerings to summon it. However, Dake squinted his eyes and observed White Gouda's subtle expressions. He didn't make that choice. After the Silver Cup finals in the afternoon, he already had a good understanding of White's Bloody Serpent. Card name, Bloody Serpent. Type, Guide Card, Level, Race, Reptile, Attribute, Dark, Magic Power, 4,500, Attack, 4,000, Defense, 2,500, Ultimate Skills, Giant Beast, Village of Blood Mist, Black Jade Snake Ball. Although its aura was strong, it wasn't a gold card. Bloody Serpent had used 2 sure kill skills in the previous duels. One was the ultimate skill, Village of Blood Mist, which released blood mist and shrouded the entire arena in blood mist. The other one was the black light that shot out from its bloody mouth, Black Jade Snake Ball. The former was a pseudo-field skill, but it could move around using Bloody Serpent as its core. Its effect was very comprehensive. First, it had an area of effect. Although the damage wasn't high, it was very sustainable. Second, it could penetrate the target within the area, lowering their defense and messing up their minds. They would gradually go crazy and become the Bloody Serpent as food or even servants. Lastly, it could also give the Bloody Serpent the ability to recover HP and MP that magic guide fairies didn't have. Village of Blood Mist was an ultimate skill that didn't cause much damage in a short period of time, but if it continued to occupy the field, its effect would gradually become obvious. It was more suitable in a crowded battlefield. The main attack of Bloody Serpent was Black Jade Snake Ball. Black Jade Snake Ball was very similar to Destructive Ray in terms of power and appearance. However, due to the Bloody Serpent's huge body, the black ray that it shot out had a very wide area of effect. Apart from that, Dake Dimensional also figured out its hidden passive skill, Giant Beast, through its performance in the competition. Giant Beast was an ultimate skill that could increase the body size, 3 measurements, and pressure of the opponent. Bloody Serpent as 3 stats should have an additional 500 points of magic attack and defense, respectively. Furthermore, its 3 measurements were already extremely strong. After the increase of 500 points, Bloody Serpent as 3 measurements became 5, 000/4, 500/3, 000. Therefore, Bloody Serpent's attack method was very simple. It was just pure strength. Contestant White Gouda has successfully summoned an 8-star Bloody Serpent at the beginning of the 3rd round. In front of this terrifying giant serpent, can contestant Dake Diming's 2-star rabbit stand firm? The commentator said the last sentence in a very readable tone. Although the 2-star fairy tale world, Little Rabbit, was amazing, it was only a 2-star magic elf card after all. In front of the 8-star Bloody Serpent, it might not even be enough to fill the gaps between its teeth. Of course, as a commentator who was not a bad person, he would not jump to conclusions before the results were out. However, behind him, the audience's cheers seemed to have written the result on their faces. Although Dake Dimeng had a magic elf card that was comparable to or even better than the Bloody Serpent, if he did not draw it, it would be useless. Since Dake Dimeng still did not show any signs of taking action, the commentator was inclined to believe that he did not draw it. If that was the case, this duel would be very dangerous. If I were White Gouda, I would definitely seize this opportunity and try my best to win this round, he thought to himself. Facing the crazy waves caused by the Bloody Serpent, White Gouda's fans finally spoke up. On the other hand, Dake Diming's fans quieted down. Even the second-year students of the Aristocrat Academy held their breaths and watched with serious expressions. This duel seemed to have entered the climax at the beginning of the 3rd round. However, White Gouda was not satisfied with the pure power of the Bloody Serpent. The moment the cooldown of the sacrificial summoning ended, he picked out a new magic elf card from his hand, pressed it lightly, and chanted, "In the name of White Gouda, I summon the Soul-Shattering Jade." This was a special item card that he had refined under Ophelia Blood's guidance using the special treasure he had obtained from the underground city, the Soul Jade. The Soul-Shattering Jade could make the magic elf immune to most changes, debuffs, and abnormal effects for 30 seconds. Although it would temporarily remove the buff effect of the magic elf, it was still a very powerful item card. White Gouda had used this Soul-Shattering Jade to defeat Saraswati's final struggle. Now, he was very lucky. He had already completed the puzzle of victory in the 3rd round. Without any hesitation, he summoned it and shot it at the Bloody Serpent, that was still more than 10 meters tall. Bang! As the Soul-Shattering Jade shattered, a thin layer of jade light appeared on the body of the Bloody Serpent. However, it was this thin layer of jade light that gave the Bloody Serpent the ability to remain undefeated. Blood Mist Village, kill. Blood-red mist seeped out from the gaps between the scales of the Bloody Serpent, and gradually spread out. the bloody serpent raised its head, flicked its tongue, and suddenly shot out. Its enormous body shot directly from the red half to the blue half, and with an almost barbaric momentum, it crushed the arched bridge above the pool into pieces. As for the moon god beast, who reacted quickly, it jumped into the pool and was spared from the disaster. However, the bloody serpent did not care about it at all. The fantastical beast, Polymorph, which was standing outside the dark barrier, was its first target. After all, the fantastical beast, Polymorph, did not have intelligence. Its reaction was half a beat slower, so it dodged under Dake's reminder, but it was still crushed by the bloody serpent. The bloody serpent's attack power was as high as 5,000 points. Although it did not use its full strength, it still crushed the fantastical beast, Polymorph, until it was left with only a sliver of HP. In a panic, it shrunk into the shape of a fruit-eating worm, and rolled to the side. The bloody serpent, on the other hand, continued to crush the bloody serpent, and rushed into the blue half. Ultimate skill, Teardrop Shot. The lunar god beast, which had dove into the water, gathered its power between the antennae on its forehead. Balls of water condensed and shot out. Bang! The teardrop-like water ball was about to hit the bloody serpent's body, but it shattered like a bubble. Even the tearing effect was completely nullified by the soul-shattering jade. It didn't even delay the bloody serpent for a second. The white light was like a pillar that descended instantly. The cute beast, which was hiding behind the fairy tale animal, Rabbit, released its ultimate skill, Heal Well. The fantastical beast, Polymorph, which only had a sliver of HP left, immediately felt the warmth flowing into it. Its 2,500 points of MP instantly recovered by more than half, and it continued to recover at a rate of 300 MP per second. Polymorph, use, transform. Facing such a disadvantageous situation, Dake Diming's voice did not tremble at all. His calmness in such a situation made the White Gouda worry a little. This trace of worry was like a crack that was gradually tearing his heart apart. In the last two duels of the Silver Cup, he had used the bloody serpent to win by forcing his opponent to use the corresponding magic card first. However, in this duel, his pace was completely disrupted. The bloody serpent was in front of the fairy tale animal, Rabbit, in the blink of an eye. The White Gouda did not care about the lunar god beast, but he was determined to destroy the fairy tale animal, Rabbit. If he did not do that, he would not be able to get his way. Swallow it. The White Gouda stared at the pink rabbit that was hiding behind the tree stump and issued a cruel order to the bloody serpent. Roar! The bloody serpent suddenly opened its bloody mouth. Just as it was about to bite down, a similar roar suddenly came from behind it. Then, a huge force pulled it back. It turned around and saw a bloody serpent that was exactly the same as itself, except that it was smaller. When the bloody snake straightened its body, it coiled around him like a chain and wrapped itself tightly around his body. It was the fantasy beast, Polymorph. The fantasy beast, Polymorph, finally used its ultimate skill, Transform. However, when the transform target was the third-tier magic fairy, the bloody serpent tried its best and only copied a small part of its data. This small part of the data allowed the bloody serpent to successfully increase its size and strength, but the part about the ultimate skill was copied to the colossal beast. This increased the fantasy beast, Polymorphous magic power to 3,000 points, its attack to around 3,500 points, and its defense to 3,000 points. Only in terms of defense, the fantasy beast, Polymorph, was almost the same as the bloody serpent. The fantasy beast, Polymorph, successfully restrained the bloody serpent by coiling its whole body. Seeing this, the Dake Dimming finally made his move. He gently pulled out the armed card from his hand and silently chanted a summon. In the name of the Dake Dimming, I summon the magic gun. A white light shot out from the surface of the card and instantly projected in front of the fairy tale world, Little Bunny. Me. The little bunny nervously looked at the driver that suddenly appeared and reached out to grab it. Then, another hand came out of nowhere and grabbed the handle of the spear first. Cute beast. The Dake frowned. Okay, chirp. The cute beast reluctantly put the magic gun back into the fairy tale world, Little Bunny's hand. This small interlude did not have a significant impact on the situation. At this moment, the white Gouda's roar sounded, "Black Jade Snake Ball." The bloody serpent, that was half of its body, gave up on the fantasy beast, polymorph, and stared at the blue summoning area with its mouth wide open. The black shining ball of light quickly condensed in its mouth. As the black jade snake ball grew bigger and bigger, the aura it emitted became more and more terrifying. The fairy tale animal, Little Bunny, trembled under the aura. The cute beast was not afraid. It opened its eyes wide and stared at the bloody serpent. The fantasy beast, Ibu, started to run toward the edge of the battlefield. The bloody serpent as target was the fairy tale animal, Little Bunny. As long as it ran far enough, it would not be affected. The bloody serpent was also under the bloody serpent's eyes, and suddenly, the bloody serpent exerted an upward force. The bloody serpent lightly hooked its finger and caused the bloody serpent to fly up into the sky. The black jade snake ball had finished condensing. The bloody serpent had to choose between the fairy tale animal, Little Bunny, and the fairy tale animal, Little Bunny. He did not hesitate and looked coldly at the bloody serpent that humiliated him. He did not notice that in the dark barrier's blurry vision, the other bloody serpent climbed onto the shore and patted its little belly anxiously. Dong, dong, dong. The crisp sound of the bloody serpent patting its belly was completely covered by the roaring sound. The moon god beast's timing was perfect. When the bloody serpent spat out the black deathlight, the fairy tale animal, Little Bunny, disappeared without a trace. Chirp! The cute beast, that was completely exposed under the black jade snake ball, showed a confused expression. Then, this 2-star magic elf with 0 attack and defense instantly evaporated under the black deathlight. However, from the bloody serpent's point of view, the cute beast and the fairy tale animal Little Bunny were killed at the same time. Because of this, he relaxed his brows and exhaled heavily. Finally, just as the word "die" came out halfway and his thoughts were about to clear up, he suddenly noticed something and suddenly lowered his head at that moment. Through the hazy dark barrier, the pink rabbit that could not be killed no matter how hard he tried entered his field of vision once again. Then, he watched as the pink furry rabbit raised the gun-shaped driver above its head and pulled the trigger forcefully. Bang! The badge of light in the slot instantly shot out and rolled on the empty ground in front of it, drawing a huge hexagram magic array at an extremely fast speed. Almost at the same time, the driver in the fairy tale animal, Little Bunny's hand turned into light and disappeared. Then, from the hexagram magic array, a huge robot with red as its main color slowly floated out. The magic king of fire and earth, the light user, appeared under the gaze of countless people. Me. The fairy tale animal, Little Bunny's eyes were filled with excitement. It immediately ran toward the armored vehicle with its short legs. But as soon as it took a step, it suddenly jumped into the air, and its 2 little legs crossed each other in the air. The moon god beast, which was also small in size, lifted it up like a willow tree and then threw it out like a radish. Whoosh! The fairy tale animal, Little Bunny, flew toward the light user's breastplate with the wind. Me. No one noticed the fairy tale animal, Little Bunny's scream. Its body, which was tightly holding onto the tree stump, shot into the light user's body just like that. Thus, the gigantic machine began to move. In the name of the white Gouda, I summoned the burning blood force. The white Gouda resisted the ominous feeling in his heart and activated the magic card in his hand. The red blood flame suddenly rose, and the bloody serpent gained more power at that moment. It swung its tail and threw the fantasy beast, monster, that was entangled with it up. Then, its huge tail forcefully resisted the fantasy beast, monster, and viciously whipped the light user that was in the middle of transforming. The fantasy beast, Ibu, who ran to the corner of the field, suddenly patted its little belly. The light user's figure, together with the fairy tale animal, Little Bunny, instantly teleported to its side and appeared under the bloody serpent's eyes again. In the name of the Dake Dimming, I summon the Maniac Mask. Dake silently chanted the summon. A clown mask with red makeup appeared next to the light user's hand. Under the control of the fairy tale animal Little Bunny, it reached out and grabbed the Maniac Mask. The Maniac Mask suddenly became the size of the Maniac Mask's body. The light user put the Maniac Mask on its face. Happiness +3. Rationality -3. Hysterical laughter faintly came out from the cockpit, and it became louder and louder, crazier and crazier. Mimamai. 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 Oh. 10,000 words, 5th update. The unlimited monthly votes for the Spring Festival event will end today. Those who have monthly votes, please vote. Thank you. Chapter 727. After putting on the laughing mask, fairy tale animal, Bunny, revealed a crazy clown smile in the Lightbringer's cockpit. It stood in the tree stump, and although it was not wearing the mask, it was pressing its face in the same way. Its harmless expression turned ferocious in an instant. Its laughter was crazy and sharp, and its button-like eyes widened as blood gushed out from its eyes. The laughing mask's second effect, Laughing Clown, was triggered. Laughing Piercing Clown. The clown that has fallen into madness will stimulate its potential in order to fulfill its joy. Its attack will continue to rise and its defense will continue to fall. Duration of 3 minutes. Once activated, it cannot be deactivated. Lightbringer's mana had inherited Fairy Tale Animal, Bunny's value, and with Zoo's buff, it was 1,200 points. His attack and defense were both 2,500 points. After Laughing Clown was triggered, Lightbringer's defense would decrease by 100 points every second, and its attack would increase by 100 points. Remember the URL. Vipkanshu. 6. It only took 25 seconds for the 2,500 points of defense to be completely converted. Its attack would be boosted to 5,000 points. 1,200 points of mana. 5,000 points of attack. 0 points of defense. After 25 seconds, Lightbringer would turn into a blade as thin as a piece of paper. However, it would still take 25 seconds to convert its attack and defense. Dake observed the situation on the field, his mind quickly calculating the attack and defense of Bloody Serpent and Lightbringer, and his thoughts were getting clearer. Mimamai. Fairy Tale Animal, Bunny's crazy laughter did not stop. Because of this, an extremely strange atmosphere was born in the entire venue. Inside and outside the arena, everyone's attention was once again attracted by this pink furry rabbit. White Gouda, who had been staring at the pink bunny since the beginning, had his eyes bloodshot. He did not know the effect of the laughing mask. Fairy Tale Animal, Bunny's maniacal laughter was filled with provocation in his eyes. The shrill laughter entered his ears as if it was mocking him. Because of this, he felt even more humiliated. His already unstable emotions once again slipped into the abyss of losing control. Bloody Serpent. A roar mixed with anger rushed out of his throat. For the nth time, White Gouda ordered Bloody Serpent to kill Fairy Tale Animal Bunny. 2 consecutive hits of flesh allowed Fairy Tale Animal Bunny to dodge the deadly attacks of Bloody Serpent one after another. However, White Gouda could also see the origin of these 2 fats. He knew that illusory beast, Ibu, had wasted one chance to use Mimic, and there wouldn't be any more fats after that. In other words, Fairy Tale Animal Bunny had nowhere to hide. As for the Fairy Tale Animal Bunny, since the Fairy Tale Animal Bunny still chose to teleport to avoid the Bloody Serpent, it meant that it still couldn't withstand the Bloody Serpent's tail whip. White Gouda made this judgment in a very short time. While the effect of Burning Blood Force was still active, the Bloody Serpent dragged its lower body, which was wrapped around by Illusory Beast, Polymorph, and crawled forward. The serpent swayed its head and smashed itself towards the Light Messenger like a giant hammer. The Light Messenger was quite tall, and its height alone was more than 6 meters. However, Compared to the bloody serpent, it was like a child. The bloody serpent suddenly burned with blood flames, and its strength was pushed to the limit. The power of this hammer was like a meteor crashing into the ground, and its power was terrifying. Not to mention that the bloody serpent's defense had dropped because of the laughing mask. Even if its defense hadn't dropped, it wouldn't have been able to withstand this terrifying attack. If the bloody serpent was hit by this hammer, Light Messenger, and the fairy tale animal bunny, inside it would be killed instantly. However, the bloody serpent's attack was too long. When the fairy tale animal bunny threw itself at the bloody serpent, while laughing crazily, then it dashed past the bloody serpent and reached the dead end of the bloody serpent. Then it raised its hand and laughed crazily. Me! Come out, wishful godly sword! The fairy tale animal bunny reached out its hand, and the light in its hand condensed into a sword. Outside the bloody serpent, the ground in front of the bloody serpent suddenly cracked open, and a huge red sword drilled out. The bloody serpent stepped forward and grabbed the hilt of the sword, pulling it out. Wishful godly sword! The bright light disappeared, and the sword was revealed. Everyone's attention was attracted by this huge sword that was burning with golden red flames. They didn't notice that the third round had already ended. The bloody serpent's jade light that was generated by the soul-breaking jade had completely disappeared. This powerful item card didn't have much effect in these 10 seconds. Instead, it reduced the effect of the bloody serpent. However, as the jade light shattered, the bloody serpent's mana recovery effect finally came back. The bloody serpent's mana that was consumed by the bloody serpent was slowly replenished. The bloody serpent's power surged. After smashing a huge hole in the ground, it forcefully turned its body and bit at the bloody serpent. However, the fairy tale animal bunny that summoned the wishful godly sword still didn't have the slightest intention of confronting the bloody serpent head-on. The magical beast, ever-changing monster, more or less restricted the bloody serpent's movement. The fairy tale animal bunny laughed crazily while dragging the sword all the way. The bloody serpent's mana consumption after putting on the bloody serpent and summoning the wishful godly sword consumed hundreds of mana points per second. This made the bloody serpent's mana go up and down crazily like a roller coaster, but it still couldn't reach its limit. The bloody serpent seemed to be tailor-made for the bloody serpent. Is that the magic gun? Arvette stared at the bloody serpent and recalled the information of this special armed card. She was a little surprised. When she saw the fairy tale animal bunny's background, she didn't think about the bloody serpent and the fairy tale animal bunny's combination at all. This was mainly because the bloody serpent had a basic requirement for the driver. It had to be at least in human form. Although the fairy tale animal bunny could stand on both feet, there was no way to prove whether it met the requirements. However, the fairy tale animal bunny had proven that it could drive the bloody serpent. This was actually because of the fairy tale equipment's passive effect. Dake actually hid the fairy tale animal bunny's ability to summon a recorded vehicle-type armed card to its side. Battle Stage 4, 30s. Before the round changed, the cute beast and lunar beast in Dake's field had already died under the black jade snakeball and tail whip. After the round changed, illusory beast, Ibu, also unleashed its last bit of strength. After it released Wish on illusory beast, Multiform, it was smashed to death by bloody serpent. The reason why it used Receive on illusory beast, Multiform, and not fairy tale animal, bunny, was naturally because the latter didn't need it. At this time, there were only 5+1 enchanted elves left in the field. Blue team, illusory beast, Multiform, fairy tale animal, bunny. Red team, bloody serpent, totem pole, crypt plant, and a demon leech. In terms of numbers, the white Gouda had the upper hand. In terms of the overall situation, the white Gouda also had the upper hand. The bloody serpent, which was burning with blood, still had a strong deterrent effect. Although Light Messenger's wishful godly sword attracted a lot of attention, fairy tale animal, bunny, evasive behavior had weakened the audience's expectations for wishful godly sword. The White Gouda kept ordering the Bloody Serpent to chase after Bunny. His finger touched the top of the deck and consecutively drew 2 new enchanted cards. After taking a look, he immediately spread out one of the enchanted cards and suddenly summoned. In the name of the White Gouda, special summon, Dark Shadow Leech. Yes, he had drawn a second Dark Shadow Leech. At this time, the concentration of dark elements in the dark barrier had decreased due to the first special summon, but it still retained the ability to special summon a second one. The White Gouda didn't have any high-star enchanted elves that needed to be sacrificed. This special summon of Dark Shadow Leech was to rely on Dark Shadow Leech's movement ability to restrict Light Messenger's movement. Once it was slowed down, the Bloody Serpent would be able to deal a fatal blow to it. After only 3 seconds, the second Dark Shadow Leech was born in the vortex of dark elements and immediately dived into the shadows. The dark barrier, released by the totem pole, was only left with a very thin layer. It had basically lost its effect. At this time, on the other side of the blue team's platform, Dake had already drawn 2 new enchanted cards. Bliss Roar, Moon, Curly Ear. In this 4th round, Dake Dimming finally drew a second Bliss card, and it was the most powerful Bliss Roar, Moon. It was a pity that Illusory Beast, Ibu, and Luna Beast had been destroyed. Otherwise, he could immediately obtain a new 6-star combat power. If it was Curly Ear, it could only evolve into a 5-star Long-Eared Rabbit. Although Long-Eared Rabbit had the ability to threaten Bloody Serpent, it would be a waste to use Bliss Roar, Moon to evolve it. And with the current situation, there was no need for that. Dake already had a plan in mind. He still chose to observe and leave the battle to Illusory Beast, Changeable Monster, and Fairy Tale Animal, Little Rabbit. Bloody Serpent's magic power is 4,500 points. With Giant Beast as passive bonus, it can reach 5,000 points. Wishful Divine Sword has a passive bonus of plus 500 attack. Lightbringer only needs to convert 2,000 points of attack to increase its attack to 5,000 points. Time required, 20 seconds. If it's safe, there's nothing to ask for. Bang! At this time, the Dark Barrier's last remnant was destroyed by the Lightbringer's elbow. The Dark Shadow Leech's body was suddenly exposed as the shadows faded away. But in the blink of an eye, it jumped into the Lightbringer's shadow again. However, the Lightbringer suddenly turned around, and the giant sword that was burning with golden flames shone behind it. The giant shadow was instantly dispersed, and the Dark Shadow Leech was exposed again before it could react. Then, the Lightbringer's sword lightly pierced through the Dark Shadow Leech. This was the Lightbringer's first attack after summoning the Wishful Divine Sword. The Dark Shadow Leech, which only had 1,800 points of magic power, didn't even have time to react before it was killed on the spot. Bang! White Gouda slammed his fist on the table and took a deep breath. He was deeply regretful. Although the Lightbringer didn't attack, the aura that it released was at least at the 2nd rank. The Dark Shadow Demon Leech was a super fragile monster with only 100 points of defense. Therefore, it was not surprising that it was killed in one hit by a 2nd-tier elven mage with a weapon. The problem was that he was too eager to kill the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, so he ordered it to stop the Dark Shadow Leech, which led to the Dark Shadow Leech's death. This move could be said to be extremely bad. It was a completely unnecessary mistake. However, this seemingly innocuous episode also showed the Lightbringer's, the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit's great adaptability. This harmless 2-star magic guiding fairy had overturned his understanding time and time again. After killing the Dark Shadow Leech, the Little Rabbit became even more arrogant, and its laughter almost made his teeth shatter. His mentality was completely out of balance. Crypt Grass. Finally, White Gouda ordered the Crypt Grass that was hiding under the ground. At this moment, the bloody flames on the Bloody Serpent's body started to fade. The fantasy beast, monster, was still trying its best to stop the Bloody Serpent from moving. The Lightbringer had a huge body, but it was laughing and jumping around like a rabbit. Finally, it stepped on one of the cryptgrass's underground traps. At that moment, the cryptgrass's mouth suddenly opened. The Lightbringer's left foot stepped down, and it fell into the cryptgrass's mouth. Then, this 3-star magic elf closed the cage and bit the Lightbringer's left foot. The fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, in the Lightbringer's cockpit was covered in cold sweat, and the laughing mask that it had lost seemed to come back to its senses. People who couldn't see through the cage couldn't imagine how close it was to death at that moment. The moment the cryptgrass bit it, the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit's remaining mana was even lower than when it took the fatal throw from the Oxhead Axeman head-on. Because of this, the tone of its wild laughter changed for a moment. However, other than the rabbit and Dake, no one else noticed. No one knew that the Lightbringer, that looked big, was actually as fragile as a thin piece of paper. Since no one noticed, it was as if it didn't happen. Meow. The fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, wiped its sweat with its short hand and let out a long sigh. But after that moment, the shadow of the bloody serpent shrouded it. The blood mist that surrounded the bloody serpent corroded its surface first. The acid from the cryptgrass's mouth was corroding its left foot. The fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit's mana was going back and forth between the limit and the limit every second. Roar! The bloody serpent carried the last remaining bloody flame and slammed into the Lightbringer that was bitten by the cryptgrass. The fantasy beast, variety monster, couldn't completely lock the bloody serpent's movements. The stinky wind attacked. The white Gouda's face showed a slightly hideous smile. The fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit's laughter disappeared. The Lightbringer used its waist as an axis and suddenly turned around at that moment. After raising its head, it instantly met the bloody serpent's huge snake eyes. Both of them had the same thought in their eyes: death. Roar! The world moved. The sound was restored. The fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, made a gesture of turning around and unsheathing its sword. The Lightbringer lifted the wishful godly sword. Instantly, and like a well-trained warrior, it slashed at the bloody serpent that was charging at it like a train. The golden-red flame on the sword suddenly rose and boiled, making the wishful godly sword, which was already very thick and long, look even thicker and longer. As the flame flashed, the blade of the sword lit up. The bloody serpent, which had 3,000 points of defense, was like a piece of tofu pudding when it touched the blade of the sword. It didn't even have the slightest impact on the blade of the sword. The bloody serpent's head was cut into 2 halves by the sword light. The fiercer the bloody serpent was, the faster it was cut into 2 halves. The force of the head-on collision was completely negated. The huge bloody serpent, which had a circumference of a few meters, was cut into 2 halves by the sword. The bloody serpent's momentum stopped, and the front half of its body that was cut into 2 halves suddenly fell down. However, before its body hit the ground, it melted in the air. The terrifyingly huge body turned into countless magic light spots in the night wind that had lost its stench. It was like a sea of stars that reflected the bright stars in the night sky. The white Gouda suffocated at that moment. No one could understand what had happened. The audience thought that the bloody serpent had seized the opportunity to kill the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit. However, in the next second, they realized that it had been cut into 2 halves by the pink furry rabbit. The stadium returned to silence. However, this silence only lasted for less than half a second. It was completely destroyed by the surprise, shock, and cheers of the tens of thousands of audience members. Yvette revealed a sincere smile amidst the tsunami-like cheers. Alphalia looked at the white Gouda on the red team's platform worriedly. Professor Shi Erfu stared at the white Gouda's expression closely. The moment the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, retracted its hand, it stabbed at the crypt that bit its left foot. The split body of the crypt plant was pierced by the sword and turned into magic power that dissipated. The disappeared ground returned to normal and pushed the light messenger's left foot back. The fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit's shrill laughter echoed in the night sky again. A snow-white light fell from the sky. The fantasy beast, ever-changing monster, bathed in the light of wish, and quickly recovered its magic power. On the blue team's platform. Dake Dimming suddenly raised his head, and a golden light appeared in his green eyes. The Eye of Truth quietly opened. His gaze was also fixed on the white Gouda on the red team's platform, just like Professor Shi Erfu's. At this moment, the audience's gaze was divided into three. Most people were looking at the light messenger, but there were also people looking at the two players on the platform, trying to catch the changes in their expressions. The commentator only spoke after a long while. Dake Dimming was neither happy nor sad. White Gouda, on the other hand, seemed to have been petrified. I really didn't expect the White Gouda's 8-star magic guide sprite to leave the stage in such a way. The commentator's voice floated like a cloud. There was only a single digit left on the 4th round's countdown. Battle stage 4. Zeros. Drip. The moment the countdown reached 0, the sound of water droplets fell into one's heart. White Gouda's completely petrified expression changed in that instant. His eyelids suddenly twitched violently. His pitch-black pupils unnoticeably expanded outwards, causing the area occupied by the whites of his eyes to shrink correspondingly. He suddenly raised his hand and rubbed his cheeks. The corners of his mouth curled up a little as he rubbed his palms, but his expression became colder and colder. If one didn't pay special attention, this change wouldn't be easy to notice. However, people like Dake and Professor Shi Erfu could see it very clearly. In the Eye of Truth's vision, there was a faint shadow floating behind White Gouda. Although Dake didn't know what it meant, he was certain that White Gouda's second consciousness had been activated. Looks like the plan is going well. Dake muttered silently. So, my opponent has changed from White Gouda to you? However, in reality, White Gouda still retained his sense of self at this moment. He hadn't completely replaced his second consciousness yet. Battle stage 5. 27s. No matter how surprised the audience was, the duel wouldn't be paused because of this. After confirming that White Gouda had changed, Dake casually drew a card. 2 new magic guide cards were added to his hand. Fairy Puppet. Bliss 3. I have to give him some space, don't I? Dake looked at the 2 cards in his hand and then looked up at White Gouda. The red team still had Totem Pole, Crypt Weed, and a Demon Leech on the field. However, Totem Pole was just a pole without Dark Ward, and Crypt Weed only had 2/3 of its mana left, so it wasn't much of a threat. The last, Demon Leech, was only a 1-star sacrifice. This meant that Dake could end this duel if he wanted to. However, he had promised Professor Shi Erfu that this duel would be serious, so he didn't give any new orders to Fairy Tale Animal, Bunny, and Fantasy Beast, Polymorph. Perhaps Fairy Tale Animal, Bunny, and Fantasy Beast, Polymorph, were still immersed in the joy of finally eliminating the Bloody Serpent, so they didn't do anything substantial. Under such circumstances, Dake noticed that the White Gouda's expression suddenly changed when he looked at the 2 new magic guide cards. At that moment, a black tide surged out from the depths of his eyes and completely covered his consciousness. This kind of coverage was completely different from Angus Jeffrey's situation. White Gouda's main consciousness wasn't dormant. It was just like a thin veil covering his main consciousness. He didn't feel much, but he was actually being controlled by his second consciousness. The huge doubts he had when he saw the 2 new magic cards vanished into thin air after being replaced by the second consciousness. White Gouda narrowed his eyes and looked at the opposite side. Then, he slowly said in a cold voice, "The game has just begun." The atmosphere instantly exploded. In the name of White Gouda, I offer a Demon Leech and a Totem Monster as sacrifices. White Gouda's aura changed abruptly. His eyes were cold and his temperament was awe-inspiring. He took out a card from his hand and held it up high. He actually began to cast the sacrificial summoning spell on the spot. It was completely different from before. His mastery of the sacrificial summoning spell had broken through to a new level. It was unusually smooth when he cast it. In the red half of the zone, the Demon Leech, that was hiding in the shadows, and the Totem Monster, that had been standing in the summoning zone all along, turned into a beam of light that shot up into the sky under the guidance of the sacrificial summoning spell. White Gouda called out the name of the magic guide card in his hand. Sacrificial Summoning. Demon General, Habakkuk. A huge and complicated sacrificial summoning circle appeared right above the red summoning zone. Dark and twisted smoke slowly rose from the sacrificial summoning circle. A skinny and handsome humanoid demon general appeared in the center of the summoning circle. It was a magic guide spirit with a unique name. Based on the number of sacrifices, it should be a 4-star magic guide spirit. Demon General, Habakkuk, had a white face and no beard. It had a high-nosed bridge, green eyes, and golden red hair. Its ears were slightly shorter than the elves' long ears, but they were still longer than a human's. One of its ears was pierced with a ruby stud. It appeared with one knee on the ground. When it raised its head, it opened its mouth and revealed its sharp fangs. It was a vampire. 4-star vampire? Dake frowned slightly. He was sure that the White Gouda had never summoned this magic guide spirit. He didn't think that the White Gouda would have kept such a trump card in its duel with Ai Ma Métis and Saraswati. Then, there was only one possibility left. This wasn't a magic guide card that he made. Dake instantly realized that this might be the reason why the White Gouda's expression changed drastically when it saw the new magic guide card. He drew a magic guide card that didn't belong to him from his deck. Then, the second consciousness invaded his mind and took control of his body. This duel, in a true sense, had just begun. Habakkuk. In the audience, Archbishop Caleb Norris, who was sitting next to the eldest prince, lost control of his strength and crushed the armrest on his right. Prince Charles was splashed with wood shards. He was instantly alerted and turned sideways. Archbishop? Caleb Norris stared at the demon general, Habakkuk, in the arena. The look in his eyes slowly disappeared. He finally took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "It's Habakkuk." Habakkuk. Prince Charles repeated the name and tried hard to recall. He had an impression of this name, but because he didn't experience the war, his impression was very shallow. It wasn't until Caleb Norris reminded him that he suddenly remembered that this was a general in the demon race's vampire army. The demon general, Habakkuk, wasn't considered strong among the vampires, but it was extremely intelligent and had the potential to be a general. The 100 Races Alliance had once launched a plan called Decapitation Strategy, and the demon general, Habakkuk, was one of them. He had brought terrible losses to humans and the Alliance. He was once the nightmare of many humans. Of course, even if not strong, the demon general, Habakkuk, couldn't only be a 4-star. It was just that the magic guide spirits in the magic guide card didn't necessarily have the same strength as the real body. However, a magic guide spirit with a clear name could generally inherit some of the original body's abilities. The 4-star demon general, Habakkuk, was definitely not bad. Caleb Norris, of course, wouldn't consider this. After Angus Jeffrey mastered Demon King Armstrong, this hero's son also mastered Demon General Habakkuk. His low murmur was a little gloomy, and he was full of doubts about why this happened. Eldest Prince Charles, who was beside him, had an even purer thought. The hero's son has become a demon general of the demon race. Ha ha ha, he laughed. If the Archbishop wasn't beside him, he would have laughed out loud. Apart from Archbishop Caleb Norris, there were actually many people who could recognize the demon general, Habakkuk, at a glance. Avette's expression also became solemn at this time. At this time, she had already seen some problems from some of the details in the field that weren't quite the same as a normal duel. However, because Dake didn't leak the matter of Into the Abyss, she couldn't deduce the answer out of nothing. Then she thought with some worry, could this be related to the matter of Olga being invited? If it is, the seriousness of the matter will probably increase in an instant. Wait, isn't Ophelia in the academy? Or is it just a coincidence? Her thoughts became complicated. In the circular belt. Professor Shi Erfu sighed slightly. She knew that her judgment so far should be correct. White Gouda was indeed the third party. However, under this background, there were probably more things that could be dug out. She had a vague premonition. Next, let's see how far Dake can go. Thinking this, she couldn't help but turn her head to look in the direction of Ophelia Bullard. Could it be that she already knew? Her brows furrowed tightly as she thought of this. Ophelia Bullard, the Blood Bell, seemed to be wearing the mask of pain at this time. Judging from her performance, even if she didn't know the details, she probably already noticed some signs that couldn't be revealed to outsiders. Hephaestus Doragon opened his mouth and asked, "What's going on?" Ophelia didn't answer. Many times, many things were like this. Unpredictable, indescribable, and things didn't go as planned. Dake didn't know the name Habakkuk. He tried to understand the war between the demons and humans, but it was impossible for him to know the name of every demon general. Unfortunately, he didn't know anything about Demon General Habakkuk. However, it was this situation that made his smile grow wider. In this kind of duel that had nothing to do with life and death, he always liked to experience the unknown. The unknown brought fear, but it also brought joy. He pressed a fairy puppet and connected it to the light messenger, adding a new layer of insurance to the light messenger's existence. Then, he finally issued an attack order to Fairy Tale Animal, Little Rabbit, in the light messenger. Kill it. There weren't any miscellaneous things in the room. Luminous Emissary only had one sure kill skill and only one method of attack. If the sword couldn't kill the opponent, it would be killed by the opponent. Mimamai. Fairy Tale Animal, Little Rabbit, laughed wildly in response. Then, it raised the wishful sword and charged at Demon General Habakkuk. Crypt Grass. White Gouda didn't panic at all as he gave a hint. Then, he took out another magic card and quickly summoned it. Crypt Plant still had 2 more crypt traps. He could use 1 more crypt trap to slow down Light Messenger. Using this time, Demon General Habakkuk was able to display its special ability. Card name, Demon General Habakkuk. Type, Fairy Card. Level, *********. Race, Undying. Attribute, Dark. Magic Power, 2400. Attack, 1600. Defense, 1300. Ultimate Skill, Vampire Army, Blood Sacrifice Ritual, Atomization. The Last Survivor, Demon General Habakkuk, was a genuine gold card. As a vampire, it was basically an undead species or a demon species. The difference between these two species was actually quite vague. As for its attribute, it was naturally the dark attribute. However, as a 4-star magic fairy card, Demon General Habakkuk only had outstanding magic power. Its attack and defense were extremely weak. At a glance, it was obvious that it wasn't a magic fairy that was hard to deal with. Instead, it was more of a functional type. While Crypt Grass was stalling for time with its crypt traps, Demon General Habakkuk drew a blood array in the center of the red team's summoning area. It only used a few strokes to draw the outline of the array. Then, Demon General Habakkuk used Crypt Grass as a sacrifice for Blood Sacrifice Ritual. At this moment, the Crypt Plant had once again lured the Lightbringer into the split crypt trap. Although the split part was immediately destroyed, it did successfully by some time. Demon General Habakkuk offered the last 1/3 of Crypt Grass to the ancestor of the vampires, at least in concept. Then, blood quickly gushed out from the Blood Sacrifice Ritual and formed a human shape. On the red team's platform, in the middle of the white Gouda deck, a magic card automatically flew out. On the Blood Sacrifice Ritual, the human shape formed by the blood suddenly appeared. A 6-star vampire suddenly broke through the blood and was summoned by Demon General Habakkuk in a very special way. This vampire had blonde hair and red eyes. It wore a dark red tuxedo and a pair of pure white gloves. It looked more noble than Demon General Habakkuk. Its face was also very handsome, but its overly protruding aquiline nose ruined the harmony of its facial features. When it was summoned, it looked at Demon General Habakkuk coldly. Then, it pressed its hand on the hilt of its rapier and maintained its unsheathed posture as it charged at the 6-meter-tall light messenger. Card name, Vampire Viscount. Type, Fairy Card. Level, Race, Undying. Attribute, Dark. Magic Power, 2800. Attack, 2900. Defense, 1900. Ultimate skills, Phantom Rapier, Crimson Eye, Cold Blood Rage. This Vampire Viscount wasn't a famous magic fairy. Its stats were considered outstanding among the 6-star magic fairies. As for his sure kill skills, he had 3. But before that, Vampire Viscount's magic power, attack, and defense were all increased by 300 points under Demon General Habakkuk's ultimate skill, Vampire Legion. 3100, 3200, 2200. Then, when the Phantom Rapier was unsheathed, Vampire Viscount's attack would increase by 500 points. Even if the rapier was in the sheath, it could still activate its additional skill, Phantom Rapier. The Vampire Viscount's figure suddenly blurred as it charged at Light Messenger. In the next moment, it split into two. The two doppelgangers, one on the left and one on the right, quickly moved towards Light Messenger's side. The real body was like a phantom, swapping positions with the doppelgangers. In the blink of an eye, the real body and the doppelgangers surrounded Light Messenger. The Vampire Viscount twisted its wrist. Then, together with the two doppelgangers, it instantly pulled out its sword. 3 sword lights slashed out at the same time. I'm done. 10,000 words. 5th update. Completed. Brothers, cast your monthly votes and razor blades. Chapter 728. White Gouda didn't know that his deck was completely different from when he was in the finals of the Silver Cup. But at this moment, the second consciousness was in control, and his own consciousness was suppressed. He could only watch as if he was in a dream, and naturally accept this development. Finally, after returning, he forgot the process as if he had woken up from a dream, and accepted the result as an established fact. The second consciousness was far superior to White Gouda in terms of magic control, understanding of the deck, and control of the duel. When the bloody serpent was cut in half by the Light Messenger, White Gouda's mind went blank. However, his second consciousness immediately analyzed the strengths and weaknesses of the Light Messenger, and he quickly thought of a way to deal with it. He controlled Demon General Habakkuk to use Blood Sacrifice Ritual to summon Vampire Viscount from the deck. Of course, he didn't do it for no reason. Relying on the Blood Sacrifice Ritual, Demon General Habakkuk only needed half of the sacrifice to summon a vampire from his hand or deck. In Worth a God's deck, the Vampire Viscount wasn't the only Vampire Viscount that fit the criteria. He chose it because it could counter Light Messenger. The second consciousness still referred to himself as White Gouda. White Gouda focused his eyes and looked at the Vampire Viscount with a cold expression. Remember, https://m Vipkanchu. VIP, that vehicle-type weapons attack is very powerful, but its defense is weak. It's limited by its body, and its sword technique isn't that good. When it turns around, it will be a bit stiff. The Vampire Viscount can use Phantom Sword technique to split into 3 attacks and use Shift to dodge the first attack. His idea wasn't wrong, and his goal was very clear. The Vampire Viscount fulfilled his request very well. The 3 sword lights slashed out at the same time, and the light envoy that was surrounded could only swing out 1 sword. Even though the Vampire Viscount's sword swept across and instantly destroyed 2 of the phantoms, the Vampire Viscount managed to move his main body to the position of the last phantoms in time. Finally, the Light Messenger was able to unleash his full power with his sword. That sword attack could reach 3,700 points after being stacked up. If it hit, it could instantly kill the Light Messenger. However, White Gouda didn't let down his guard. From the start of the duel until now, he had a deep understanding of how powerful his opponent was. Now that he had made his move, it was finally his opponent's turn. The Vampire Viscount only had 1 last sword energy left, and it flew out like a hot knife through butter. Just as the sword energy was about to touch the Light Messenger's Light Messenger, the Light Messenger, which was supposed to look, it disappeared. That sword light slashed through the light-on voice afterimage, and then with a bang, it struck a piece of wood. The light messenger's main body instantly activated the flash spell, and was teleported out of the danger zone. After the vampire Viscount missed his attack, he suddenly turned his head, and the light messenger's huge figure appeared in his eyes again. It was teleported behind Demon General Habakkuk. This was no doubt an unexpected surprise. Me, fairy tale animal, little rabbit's laughter was still sharp, and it was too excited to finish its sentence. The wishful godly sword, that was burning with golden red flames, instantly broke through Demon General Habakkuk's clothes. Boom! Demon General Habakkuk's body exploded at that moment, and the blood mist formed after atomization rushed toward the light messenger behind him. However, the wishful godly sword still cut through the blood mist, and the golden red flames burned a large part of the mist. The flames and storms created by the flames even forced the remaining blood mist away. Demon General Habakkuk's pale face appeared from the remaining blood mist, and it was like a ghost that couldn't condense into a body. However, it didn't die. On the Blue Side's platform, Dake finally frowned. Light Messenger's attack power was as high as 5,500. Even if Demon General Habakkuk used atomization to avoid the most direct attack, it should have been burned to ashes by the golden red flames. However, it was still alive. Mimamai, fairy tale animal, little rabbit, suddenly stepped forward, and in the midst of its maniacal laughter, it swung its sword a second time at the remaining blood mist. Its reaction was extremely fast, and Demon General Habakkuk didn't even have time to react before it was burned to ashes by the sword. However, it still didn't die. Even though Demon General Habakkuk's final remnant was an extremely blurry and translucent soul, it was still alive, and it even let out a terrifying laugh at Light Messenger. What's the reason? Dake's face was filled with shock, and he quickly thought of the possibilities that could have caused this phenomenon. Kettle's sturdy and Doran Messiah's hold could have guaranteed that they wouldn't be killed in one hit. However, Demon General Habakkuk had already taken 2 hits. No, far more than 2 hits. Fairy tale animal, little rabbit, realized that it still couldn't kill Habakkuk with its sword, so it quickly shook its giant sword and slashed at Demon General Habakkuk's remnant soul. However, even though Demon General Habakkuk's soul was constantly being slashed apart, it kept reforming, and just like its race, it displayed the shocking, undying ability. He 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 he. It continued to laugh, attracting fairy tale animal, little rabbit's attention. On the other side, Vampire Viscount, who had failed to decapitate its leader, went up against Fantasy Beast 100 Faces. Fantasy Beast 100 Faces was still in its bloody serpent form, and its magic attack and defense were roughly 3,000/3, 500/3,000. Although it was far inferior to Bloody Serpent's true form, it was still enough to dominate the second tier. However, Vampire Viscount fiercely glared at Fantasy Beast 100 Faces, and scarlet waves appeared in its eyes. 2 beams of blood-red light shot out, instantly hitting Fantasy Beast 100 Faces that was charging at it. Fantasy Beast 100 Faces' huge body instantly froze under bloody-as glare, and scarlet light covered its entire body, making it unable to move. Vampire Viscount's head remained motionless, and it raised the phantom rapier in its hand horizontally. Then, it used 2 fingers of its left hand to clamp the blade of the rapier, and from the right to the left to the tip of the rapier, cold blood flowed out from between its fingers, covering the entire rapier. Sure kill technique. Cold-blooded rage. In that instant, the phantom stinger emitted a bone-chilling cold. Vampire Viscount suddenly exerted force under its feet, and this sudden burst of speed caused it to turn into an afterimage. Crimson Eye's stun effect disappeared because of its movement, but it accelerated first and took the initiative to stab Fantastical Beast, ever-changing monster skin. The cold-blooded power spread in an instant, and the chill spread. Fantasy Beast 100 Faces' body was covered with a layer of ice in the blink of an eye. The ice spread upward, and then covered half of its head. Fantasy Beast 100 Faces' movements suddenly became as stiff as a frozen corpse. Vampire Viscount sneered, and the phantom rapier in its hand madly stabbed, and each sword cut off Fantasy Beast 100 Faces' magical power by several hundred points. The total of 3,000 points of magical power seemed to be a lot, but after a few stabs, it was already reduced to skin and blood. Fantasy Beast 100 Faces, which didn't have any active killing moves, was finally no match for Vampire Viscount. However, even though the Vampire Viscount managed to kill the Fantasy Beast, multiform monster, it had also used up all 3 of its ultimate skills. Now, it was only left with a blank slate. After a while, Fairy Tale Animal, Little Rabbit, still couldn't kill Demon General, Habakkuk, and finally chose to give up. Then, it turned its head and charged at Vampire Viscount. Tick. The sound of the round changing suddenly sounded. The duel entered the 6th round. At this time, the White Gouda still had 3 cards in its hand. Dake Dimeng had 5 cards in his hand, and they were Dragon Baluto, Big Milk Jar, Bliss, Moon, Curly Ear, Bliss 3. At this time, Dake finally didn't hold back anymore, and he really started to get serious. He reached out his hand and drew a card. With 2 new magic cards in his hand, Dake had a total of 7 cards in his hand. Underworld Soul Ring, Moon Pendant, Underworld Soul Ring, and Moon Pendant. Dake's mind raced. In the arena, the White Gouda still had a demon leech, hiding in the shadows. If Fantasy Beast 100 Faces wasn't destroyed, it could be captured and sacrificed to summon the 7-star Dragon Baluto. But with the current situation, it was no longer possible. Of course, if he wanted to forcefully summon Dragon Baluto, it was also possible. Curly Ear could use Bliss 3 to evolve into a 5-star long-eared rabbit, and with the addition of the 2-star Fairy Tale Animal, Little Rabbit, it would be a 7-star monster. But it was obviously a move that didn't make up for the losses. Dake would never do this unless he had no other choice. But with the current situation, it was imperative to summon Curly Ear. Dake slightly looked and saw that Demon General Habakkuk was using its speed to contend with Light User, and Light User was unable to match up to it. This was actually normal. After all, Light User was just a weakened version. No matter how good Fairy Tale Animal, Little Rabbit's driving ability was, it couldn't allow Light User to exceed its body's limits. It was able to contend with the Bloody Serpent's tail mostly because Fantasy Beast 100 Faces was holding it back. Now that it was a one-on-one battle, it was obviously at a disadvantage. But the Wishful Godly Sword was awe-inspiring, and Demon General Habakkuk didn't have a sure kill skill, so it didn't dare to move an inch forward. Thus, it was a stalemate. Even so, it was only a stalemate for a few seconds. But this stalemate only lasted for a few seconds, and the situation could be seen. Whether it was Dake Dimeng or White Gouda, both of them already had a plan in mind. Dake didn't hesitate too much and opened his mouth to summon. In the name of Dake Dimeng, I summon Curly Ear. Thus, after Fairy Tale Animal, Little Rabbit, Cute Beast, and Moon God Beast, another furry rabbit was born. Curly Ear's head, ears, and lower body had fluffy bundles of hair, as if it was wearing a hairband and a skirt. Compared to the other furry rabbits, it was a different kind of cuteness. But when the audience saw the first appearance of this magical elf, they were a little numb. At this point, no one would be bewitched by the appearance of these magical elves. On one hand, they ridiculed, "Is this a rabbit deck?" On the other hand, they were faintly anticipating what kind of surprise this cute little rabbit would bring. On the red team's platform, White Gouda was very vigilant. Although he didn't know what abilities Curly Ear had, he was very clear that Dake wouldn't act without thinking. This Curly Ear must have something to counter Vampire Viscount. With this in mind, after a slight delay, he very solemnly summoned a magical elf card. In the name of White Gouda, I summon Blood Demon Sandra. Blood Thrall, Blood Demon, and then Vampire. This was a sequence of species that was progressing step by step. After Vampire Viscount performed the embrace on certain creatures, he could turn them into blood thralls. Then, the blood thralls would continue to transform and become blood demons, and then vampires. White Gouda once had a magical elf card called Blood Demon. But the blood demon he summoned now had a name, just like Demon General Habakkuk. This was a 3-star magical elf card. When White Gouda summoned it, he already had a plan in mind. Blood Demon, Sandra, and Curly Ear were facing each other from a distance of 100 meters. Curly Ear climbed up the stone wall and swayed in a circle. But before it could stand properly, a pink light sprinkled down. Dake had immediately activated Bliss 3. Curly Ear's body emitted the light of evolution. Its body quickly elongated in the light, and in the blink of an eye, it became extremely tall, like a sexy bunny girl. Long-eared Rabbit's level was only 5 stars, but its explosive power was extremely strong in a short period of time. It wasn't inferior to any 6-star magical elf. Most importantly, it had the speed that surpassed a Vampire Viscount. After completing its evolution, Long-eared Rabbit was no longer as confused as it was when it was still Curly Ear. It stared at the Vampire Viscount for 2 seconds, and suddenly exerted force under its feet. The stone wall instantly exploded, and smoke billowed as it shot out like an arrow. A whistling sound rang in their ears. From the blue half of the area to the red half of the area, a long line passed through in an instant. The Vampire Viscount, that was circling around Light Messenger, suddenly turned its head and raised its sword to stab forward. However, Long-eared Rabbit's figure that was charging from the front twisted its body and dodged this amazing stab with shocking reflexes. Then, with a fragrant wind, it kicked the Vampire Viscount's chest. Boom! The Vampire Viscount's chest caved in at a speed visible to the naked eye. Its entire body stopped on the spot for a moment, and then it suddenly retreated. It was actually kicked out of the boundary of the arena. Before Blood Demon Sandra, in the red summoning area, could stand still, it heard a whistling sound in its ears. The Vampire Viscount had already flown away from its side. The alarm bell in White Gouda's mind rang. He suddenly released his magic power, and the red magic ball that was expelled from the ground because of the crypt plant's death flew into the air with a swoosh. He was shocked. If Long-eared Rabbit's target was this magic ball, he might not be able to react at all. Furthermore, if Long-eared Rabbit's first attack was Blood Demon Sandra, White Gouda pressed the cards in his hand with his left hand, and they quickly cooled down. As soon as the 6th round began, he suffered a critical hit. However, the Vampire Viscount wasn't killed in one hit. He believed that Long-eared Rabbit belonged to the type that was extremely fast but lacked attack power. Now, the most important thing was to protect Blood Demon Sandra. He originally wanted to rely on Vampire Viscount to buy some time and wait until he had more cards in his hand. But now, it seemed that it would be difficult to achieve. He could only slightly advance his plan. Even if he wasn't sure if he could win, he could only gamble. In the name of White Gouda, I summoned Blood of the Black Python. He opened a card in his hand and channeled his magic power into it while chanting quickly. The card named Blood of the Black Python was covered with a thick layer of black. It was slightly longer than 3 seconds. The blood of the black python emitted a black light, and a dazzling red color suddenly gushed out from the darkness and condensed into a drop of blood that was as bright as a gem in the air. This drop of blood was sometimes black and sometimes purple. It looked like it was in great pain, but it was also emitting a strong fragrance. White Gouda's eyes were dark. He raised his right hand and pointed at the blood of the black python. The blood of the black python shot toward the ground and shot into Blood Demon Sandra's head in the blink of an eye. Transformation enhancement is not your specialty, White Gouda said coldly, but there was a hint of arrogance in his voice. Blood Demon Sandra was a vampire with a name. In the real world, Sandra was a servant of a vampire count. There was a period of time when he was known as the Blood Demon, closest to vampire. This title sounded like human, closest to God, but it wasn't a good title. The difference was between vampire and God. Blood demons could transform into vampires, and there were many examples of this since ancient times. The so-called blood demon, closest to vampire, was built on the premise that he couldn't transform into a vampire. Therefore, there was a hint of sarcasm in it. However, there was only a fine line between blood demon, Sandra, and vampires. White Gouda's blood of the black python had the ability to help him cross this fine line. Blood demon, Sandra, was tall, but he was originally quite skinny. His hair was messy, and his face was sharp. His skin was pale, and his eyes were dull. His back was hunched, and his 2 arms were hanging down. His fingers were extremely long, and his fingertips could even reach his knees. When the drop of blood of the black python dripped onto his forehead, blood demon, Sandra, suddenly opened his eyes wide. His dull eyes instantly condensed, and the color of blood filled his eyes. Dark purple veins appeared on his pale skin, and the muscles under his skin expanded crazily. In the blink of an eye, his thin and tall body turned into a muscular and majestic body. Then, 2 bat wings broke through his skin and extended out from his back. Red, black, and purple blood mist constantly seeped out of his body and surrounded him. Blood demon, Sandra, looked up to the sky and roared, expressing the excitement of transforming into a vampire. Vampire Viscount. Under White Gouda's command, the Vampire Viscount quickly returned and blocked in front of blood demon, Sandra. Vaguely, the 3 vampires on the battlefield emitted a special dark energy. At a slightly different place, Light Messenger and Long-Eared Rabbit both stopped moving. Light Messenger raised Wishful Divine Sword diagonally, and he was ready to cut his opponent in half. Long-Eared Rabbit was casting Self-Encouragement, and his body was already lit up with the light of his superpower, High-Speed Movement, was ready. 2 against 2. After eliminating Demon General Habakkuk, the situation on the battlefield became even again. However, something unexpected happened all of a sudden. Behind the Vampire Viscount, blood demon Sandra had a vicious expression on her face. She suddenly jumped forward and grabbed the Vampire Viscount's shoulder with her 2 thick arms. Then, she lowered her head and pierced the skin on the Vampire Viscount's neck with her sharp fangs. Fresh blood flowed out. Vampire Viscount's magic power dropped drastically. The scene of his companions killing each other caused an uproar outside the battlefield. Dake raised his head and looked at the White Gouda in front of him. However, he saw that the White Gouda's expression was cold, and he wasn't surprised at all. It was obvious that he had expected this. Vampire Viscount couldn't struggle under the White Gouda's command, and he could only let blood demon Sandra suck his blood dry. Even though he looked like he was in great pain, the White Gouda didn't show any mercy. After absorbing Vampire Viscount's blood, blood demon Sandra's aura started to rise. The aura of Blacktail's blood, which had reached the 2nd tier after absorbing Blacktail's blood, skyrocketed again. It looked like it was going to break through the barrier between the 2nd tier and the 3rd tier. The magic power of the Vampire Viscount had been exhausted. Its body withered and dissipated under everyone's gaze, turning into scattered magic light spots. Blood demon Sandra's aura had yet to reach its peak. However, in the next second, the White Gouda's eyes slightly sunk, and blood flames suddenly appeared on blood demon Sandra's body. Blood demon Sandra's magic power merged with the flames, and its skin gradually turned into a disgusting dark purple color. The right side of its forehead broke open, and a sharp horn that was as long as a finger appeared. The blood flames around its body merged with the power of Blacktail's blood, and it turned dark purple as well. Blood demon Sandra's aura had broken through the barrier and reached the 3rd tier. Card name, Vampire, Sandra. Type, Elf card. Level, Race, Fiend. Attribute, Dark/Poison. Magic power, 3800. Attack, 3900. Defense, 2300. Ultimate skills, Demon's Blood, Blacktail's Poison, Blood Armament, Brutal Strength. After 2 consecutive breakthroughs, Blood Demon Sandra had become an 8-star magic elf, vampire. Sandra. Its 3 attributes might not be as good as Bloody Serpent, but it was better in other aspects. First was Demon's Blood. This passive ultimate skill had an obvious source, and it increased Vampire Sandra's magic attack and defense by 500 points each. Then, under the effect of Demon General Habakkuk's ultimate skill, Vampire Army, its 3 attributes increased by 300 points each. Its 3 attributes reached a terrifying 4, 600/4, 700/3, 100. Bang! Vampire Sandra suddenly raised its hands and crossed its arms in front of its chest. Long-eared Rabbit's figure suddenly appeared after that, and the surprise kick was blocked by its arms. After absorbing Vampire Viscount, Vampire Sandra's speed skyrocketed. Although it was still not as fast as Long-eared Rabbit's high-speed movement state, it could barely keep up. Roar! After blocking Long-eared Rabbit's surprise attack, it roared and suddenly pulled out its sharp claws with dark purple nails, trying to grab Long-eared Rabbit's ankle. However, Long-eared Rabbit crossed its legs and borrowed strength from its arms. After its attack failed, it quickly fled. Vampire Sandra took a step forward and was about to chase after it, but its expression suddenly trembled, and it closed its eyes on the spot. On the red team's platform, White Gouda's smile was cold. He also closed his eyes at that moment, and then opened them again like a normal blink. Vampire Sandra did the same. However, in that instant, Vampire Sandra's eyes were completely different. Its incomparably violent aura also abruptly calmed down. I see. Dake Dimming lightly tapped his eyebrows, and in the eye of Truth's vision, a blurry black shadow also appeared behind Vampire Sandra. White's second consciousness personally came down? Then, he looked at Long-eared Rabbit, with a slightly worried expression. Long-eared Rabbit stopped on top of a broken stone pillar, and its feet were already dyed purple. It was the blacktail poison. The dark purple poison started to spread from its feet, and although the speed was not fast, it was constantly depleting its magic power. Long-eared Rabbit's time was running out. Me. Long-eared Rabbit suddenly raised its head and called out in Dake Diming's direction. Dake did not hesitate and decisively took out Moon Pendant. In the name of Dake Dimming, I summon Moon Pendant. The pendant emitting moonlight appeared in front of Long-eared Rabbit's chest. It suddenly reached out and grabbed the pendant, wearing it on its neck, and its curved eyes revealed a hint of charm. Charm +2, obtained a sure kill skill, Beauty Under the Moon, Beauty Under the Moon. Sometimes mesmerizes the opposite sex that comes in contact with you. Success rate increases when using charm type abilities. Under the moonlight, the effect of Moon Pendant is doubled. Long-eared Rabbit already had the sure kill skill Body of Charm, and now that it wore the Moon Pendant and was bathed in moonlight, its charm instantly doubled. Then, it pursed its lips and suddenly exerted force on its feet, leaving only an afterimage on the spot. It charged towards Vampire Sandra in a straight line. Long-eared Rabbit was not only fearless when it killed an 8-star magic guide elf with its 5-star body, but it even bloomed with a bright smile. Although the blacktail poison weakened its magic power, it could not deprive it of its will. Once again, it came into contact with Vampire Sandra. And it did not retreat anymore. Lightbringer, who was charging towards Vampire Sandra, suddenly stopped. This was a duel that advocated fighting in groups, and it created space for Lightbringer to fight with Vampire Sandra one-on-one in this duel ground. Tick. The sound of the turn changing did not affect its movements. Long-eared Rabbit launched a storm-like attack on Vampire Sandra. White Goad's second consciousness was multitasking. He drew cards while controlling Vampire Sandra to attack. His eyebrows, which seemed to be frozen, gradually frowned. A magic guide elf was just a magic guide elf. He thought that after he projected his consciousness into the Long-eared Rabbit, he could rely on his superb skills to further increase his strength advantage. He did not expect the Long-eared Rabbit's attacks to be so flexible. His speed was not slow, but he still could not touch the Long-eared Rabbit's fur. If he did not have the blacktail poison, all over his body, he would have been tortured to death. This thought suddenly appeared, and it could no longer be suppressed. A strong sense of shame gushed out from the bottom of his heart. At this moment, this second consciousness seemed to finally understand some of White Gouda's feelings. In the next moment, Vampire Sandra and White Gouda's cheeks turned red at the same time. Vampire Sandra's movements suddenly froze, and the long-eared rabbit instantly broke through its defense. The long-eared rabbit's feet kept enlarging in its eyes. Bang! Vampire Sandra was kicked to the ground. Although it did not lose much mana, the redness on its face became more obvious. The long-eared rabbit then let out a bell-like laugh. It did not care that half of its mana was consumed by the poison, and it continued to beat up Vampire Sandra. An 8-star magic guide elf could not fight back at all. On the red side's platform, White Gouda's face was also red. His eyes were fixed on the long-eared rabbit in the center of the platform. As if he was possessed by the wind, his emotions were burning. He wanted to jump off the platform immediately and rub his body against the long-eared rabbit. Very few people noticed this change in White Gouda. Even if they noticed, they would not be able to figure out the reason. However, Dark, who felt something in his heart, couldn't help but laugh out loud after drawing the card. He had been holding back for a long time in this duel, but his self-control had been cultivated, and he should not have laughed. But the scene in front of him had exceeded his limits. Ha! That laughter was transmitted through the loudspeaker. Fortunately, White Gouda only had eyes for the long-eared rabbit. He only heard the laughter vaguely, so he did not explode. But was this really a good thing? Dake saw that although he drew his card, he did not look at it. He shook his head and looked at his own card with a smile. Miners, Fantasy Beast, Ibu, Miners, and the second Fantasy Beast, Ibu. When Dake entered the 7th round, he had already started to summon. Because there was only one choice, and that was to summon Fantasy Beast, Ibu. The long-eared rabbit was deeply poisoned, and there was no time to delay. But although the blacktail poison's priority was very high, its damage was only average. Ibu, Prayer, Long-eared Rabbit. Receive, Fantasy Beast, Ibu. After giving out 2 commands in 3 seconds, Dake immediately summoned for the 2nd round. In the name of Dake Dimeng, I summon Underworld Soul Ring. The Underworld Soul Ring suddenly appeared and wrapped around Demon General Habakkuk's remnant soul. Fantasy Beast, Ibu, returned to the magic card. Fantasy Beast, Ibu, reappeared where it had disappeared. Long-eared Rabbit was still suppressing Vampire Sandra. But Vampire Sandra was a 3rd-tier magic fairy after all. It forcefully woke up in the middle of the battle and was once again enchanted. Dake only glanced at it and immediately used the sacrificial summoning technique. In the name of Dake Dimeng, I offer Demon General, Habakkuk, and Fantasy Beast, Ibu, as sacrificial offerings. Sacrificial summoning, Miners. He had 2 7-star magic fairies in his hand. Dulong Baluto's strength was obviously higher than Miners'. However, if he wanted to bring more smiles to this duel, Minas was undoubtedly the best choice. In the end, Demon General, Habakkuk, who would not be destroyed as long as there were other vampires on the battlefield, was completely eliminated as a sacrificial offering. Dake's luck was not bad. This sacrificial summoning, which had a high failure rate, actually succeeded. Under the moonlight, Miners exuded an astonishing charm. Even the long-eared rabbit, with the moon pendant, seemed to be inferior. Its appearance instantly attracted a lot of attention. But at this moment, the battle between Long-eared Rabbit and Vampire Sandra was indeed more exciting. Under such circumstances, Miners raised its head and used its ultimate skill, Moon Guard, at the Long-eared Rabbit's area. Moon Guard could protect itself and its companions from falling into a state of confusion, drowsiness, burning, freezing, and other abnormal states for 5 rounds. Under the moonlight, the duration would be doubled, and it would be purified. Accompanied by Mina's melodious cry, the moon in the night sky seemed to be brighter. The moonlight from the sky poured down on the red half of the battlefield, bathing fairy tale animal, bunny, and long-eared rabbit in a watery moonlight. The long-eared rabbit's poison on long-eared rabbit's body faded at an incredible speed. If the white Gouda's second consciousness was awake, it would definitely cry out in shock. White Snake's poison was once known as an incurable poison. He would never have thought that White Snake's poison would be purified by Medusa's moon guard. But it was night time, after all. The moonlight was beautiful. After that, Mina's used life water stream again. Long-eared rabbit's precarious mana was finally replenished a little. Then, the one-sided fierce battle between the 5-star and 8-star magic guide fairies continued. Ugh! On the red team platform, Wortha God suddenly let out a miserable cry. His consciousness was awake again, and he tried to summon and activate a magic guide card in his hand. The part of Vampire Sandra's consciousness that was projected on her body finally woke up. At that moment, it did not think of anything and immediately executed its last order when it was awake. It used its ultimate skill, Blood Origin Armament. It had 4 ultimate skills, and the last one was Brutal Force, which could greatly increase its attack power in a short period of time. However, this simple ultimate skill did not have the slightest bit of bravery at this moment. If it could not hit its opponent, what was the use of having a high attack power? Therefore, it decisively chose Blood Origin Armament. Then, the purple flames burning on its body suddenly condensed into an exquisite armor that stuck closely to its skin. In its right hand, there was also a purple long sword. Of course, it did not need the long sword. What it really needed was the armor to increase its defense. Long-eared rabbit's attack power was as high as 3,300 points under the self-encouragement buff, but Vampire Sandra's defense had accumulated to 3,100 points before. Long-eared rabbit chose speed and sacrificed strength to attack. Every time it was injured, the amount of mana it lost was very limited. However, as Demon General Habakkuk was sacrificed, the aura of Vampire Army completely disappeared, and Vampire Sandra's defense was only left with 2,800 points. Only after wearing the Blood Origin Armament's armor could it recover its defense and even reach an even higher 3,300 points. Blood Origin Armament was a full-body armor. After wearing it, only a pair of eyes and some hollowed-out parts of the body would be exposed. The defense of the joints would be weaker. It would be difficult for Long-eared Rabbit to hurt it again. And if it was lucky, this armor might be able to block the charm effect. White Gouda's second consciousness thought so at first. Until it was charmed again, Long-eared Rabbit accurately attacked Vampire Sandra through the hollowed-out parts of the armor. Relying on the high frequency of attacks, Vampire Sandra was tortured to death. The 8-star vampire that it controlled was killed by a 5-star pink rabbit in front of thousands of people. The second consciousness completely lost its mind. After a short pause, White Gouda closed its eyes and opened its eyes. The black tide receded, and its eyes were blank. Sun Wan, 5th watch. I went to the hospital yesterday and took a nap after that. My head is buzzing, and it's been very cute. ZZ, I'm so tired. My teeth suddenly hurt. I can't take it anymore. I'm going to sleep. I can't confirm when the new chapter will be updated today. I can only say that I'm going to be a daddy soon. Chapter 729. The change in White Gouda's expression did not escape Dake's eyes. From the perspective of the Eye of Truth, the blurry shadow behind White Gouda suddenly collapsed and disappeared. Then, White Gouda opened her eyes in a daze. Dake took about 3 seconds to sort out his thoughts. Then, his eyebrows twitched as he had a bad feeling. Oh no! According to his original plan, what he needed to do was to put as much pressure on the White Gouda as possible in this duel. He needed to increase the White Gouda's desire to win step by step, and at the same time, make the White Gouda feel despair and stimulate the second consciousness. Although the implementation process was subtly different from the situation in the plan, fortunately, the final result was the same. After drawing out the second consciousness, he needed to conduct a more comprehensive observation through duels and gather as much useful information as possible. During this process, the most important thing was to not let the second consciousness notice anything amiss and lure it to do as it pleased. Originally, everything was going smoothly. Although the jackrabbit's attacks were ferocious, its DPS against Sandra was very limited. Even if it managed to kill Sandra, it would still take a long time for it to do so. Website https://m Vipkanchu VIP. Since the White Gouda's second consciousness had already entered the arena, it must be aiming for victory. It would not give up because of such a small setback. This was just like the second consciousness of the main character, Muto Games, in the first Yu-Gi-Oh! Dark game. Every time, it would appear at the critical moment and turn the situation around. But occasionally, it would also perform candlelight in the wind. But now, Dake finally realized that he was wrong. The White Gouda's second consciousness was much more fragile than he had expected. It couldn't even withstand such a small setback. Wasn't it just an 8-star vampire getting blown up by a 5-star furry rabbit? Wasn't he just going to be bewitched by the body of charm? It's not like it's a big deal. Isn't the life barrier of the magic conducting ball still intact? Right. Dake could not help but shake his head. He was just about to enjoy the duel, but he didn't expect it to be over already. Now that this second consciousness had left in a sorry state, it would be extremely difficult to provoke it out again. Since he couldn't trigger the second consciousness, there was no point in continuing this duel with the White Gouda. Let's end it. With that thought in mind, he ordered the magic guide fairies to attack the magic sphere. Now, there was only one 1-star demon leech left in the red square. It was as good as nothing. The White Gouda was still in a state of confusion. The red magic conducting ball was in a completely defenseless state. Once its magic guiding fairy attacked, it would be impossible for it to block it. Menace. Water cannon. Fairy tale animal, rabbit, wishful divine sword. Menace raised her slender neck under the moonlight and opened her mouth slightly at the red magic ball in the sky. Ice-blue water elements quickly condensed in her mouth and spun and compressed into a water ball that emitted terrifying waves. Then, she suddenly shot it out. The thick water column instantly drowned the magic conducting ball. Fairy tale animal, rabbit, laughed maniacally and threw out a huge sword that was burning with golden flames. After the wishful divine sword was thrown out, it no longer had the special effect of absolute cut. However, the life enchantment of the magic conducting ball had no defense, so the difference was not big. Therefore, the sword crossed the sky, and flames pierced through the sky. Under the night sky where water and fire intertwined, the life enchantment of the red magic conducting ball suddenly shattered, and endless light scattered like glass. Battle ended. Beep. The referee's whistle finally woke the White Gouda up from his daze. He almost subconsciously looked at the cards in his hand, and what he saw were a few completely unfamiliar magic cards mixed in with the cards in his hand. As a result, Werther God's thought process became stagnant. His logic circuit finally had a loophole. The abnormality that he had vaguely sensed for a long time now had evidence. Some unacceptable possibilities were surging in like a flood breaking through a dam. His face was deathly pale. The end of this duel was extremely abrupt even in the eyes of the audience. Ever since Vampire Sandra was enchanted by Long-Eared Rabbit, White Gouda's performance had been very bad. No, he didn't perform at all. The audience who had high hopes for him could only think that he was unlucky and drew a useless Joker card at the end of the duel. However, the battle between Long-Eared Rabbit and Vampire Sandra was indeed exciting. Most of the audience was still immersed in the shocking feat of 5-star Rabbit defeating 8-star Vampire, and they didn't think too much about what White Gouda had been doing during this time. This incredible battle ended well, and it wasn't bad, it just made people want to see more. In the end, White Gouda lost the duel without any struggle, and many people thought that he had accepted his fate. He probably thought that he couldn't win no matter what, right? It's possible. If I were him, I would probably have the same thought. The 8-star bloody serpent was killed with one strike, and the 8-star vampire was tortured to death. If I were him, I would probably have the same thought. It's too hopeless. This is the difference between us. I've said before that this white guy is no match for our Dake. He actually dared to challenge Dake? He's just overestimating himself. It's possible for someone who doesn't know his limits to end up like this. Speaking of which, the one that killed the bloody serpent was an armed card, right? Didn't they say that the conditions to use the armed card were very strict? Why did that 2-star rabbit? That's a 2-star. The 8-star bloody serpent was killed by a 2-star pink rabbit with one strike. If you didn't mention it, I would have forgotten that the core of that armed card was a 2-star rabbit. If that's the case, then both of Werther God's 8-star magic guide sprites were killed by low-star rabbits? Isn't that too tragic? Are you saying that Dake Diming's set of cards is a rabbit set? I don't think so. After all, there are other magic elves in there. I really didn't expect that. Those rabbits. He has never summoned those rabbits before, right? So, Dake didn't use the set of cards that he was used to? Definitely not. If he used the set of cards that he was used to, wouldn't he be crushed? That would be so boring. Right. Yes. The audience's discussion was heard amidst the deafening applause. Some were criticizing the White Gouda, some were praising Dake, and some were seriously analyzing the details of this duel. The demon general, Habakkuk, and blood fiend, Sandra, summoned by the White Gouda, attracted a lot of attention. However, the White Gouda's defeat diverted people's attention away from the two magic elves and focused more on the two pink rabbits that won the duel. Of course, with Angus Jeffreys, Demon General, Amu, as a precedent, Demon General, Habakkuk, and blood fiend, Sandra, didn't mean much. In a sense, the early exit of the second consciousness was actually quite fortunate for the White Gouda. Although he had aggressively challenged Dark and ended up losing in such a humiliating manner, it was still better than summoning even more demons, magic elves. Otherwise, the Academy might have to activate the emergency system again. Even so, the White Gouda still attracted the attention of some people. Angus Jeffreys' father, Count Geoffrey. The head Archbishop of the Holy Church, Caleb Norris. After watching this duel, these two big shots were already aware of something. Because of his relationship with Angus Jeffrey, Count Geoffrey had a partial understanding of what had happened in the Academy. The Holy Church also started an investigation after Demon General, Amu, appeared. Therefore, Caleb Norris knew more, not less. For Caleb Norris, the appearance of Demon General, Habakkuk, and blood fiend, Sandra, was more surprising than Demon General, Amu. Because Demon General, Habakkuk, and blood fiend, Sandra, were both demons that appeared in the modern war. Thus, when he thought deeply, he caught more clues. However, this didn't have much meaning in comparison. This was because after the duel, Count Geoffrey had quietly appeared behind him. Eldest Prince Charles, who stayed out of it, was actually more interested in Dake, but he didn't mind taking a bite of the melon. Thus, the three of them left the duel arena together and entered a nearby Holy Church property. They sat down secretly to discuss. At the same time, although Yalvet wasn't too interested in what happened to White Gouda, Dake was also in the Academy, so she could not investigate. Compared to the three of them, if she wanted to find out the truth, she didn't need to trouble herself. In a sense, the Valkyrie who graduated from the Shang Malian Academy had always been part of the Shang Malian faction. Go and call Irene. Yalvet watched Dake go down from the stage before instructing Janice. Then, she left the arena happily. She was in a good mood. As a parent, Blood Maiden Ophelia Bullard's face was extremely ugly. In the Shang Malian Academy, if there was anyone who knew more about White than Dake and Professor Shierfu, it would be Ophelia Bullard. It was just that before tonight, Ophelia Bullard's information was actually limited. After all, she wasn't allowed to have too much contact with White. However, she was particularly sensitive to certain things, so she could quickly connect the dots. After watching this duel, she was even more convinced of the conjecture that she had subconsciously denied. Therefore, after the duel ended, she immediately got up and tried to get rid of Hephaestus Doragon, but failed. She hurriedly went to Professor Shi Erfu's office. She was going to wait for Professor Shi Erfu there. On the other side, the students didn't change much about tonight's duel, but they were venting their emotions to their heart's content. The second-year students of the Noble Academy were finally able to release their pent-up emotions after an entire day. Both the boys and girls were shouting Dake Diming's name, and a huge amount of solidarity was formed. The second-year students of the Night Academy were quite depressed after their ominous premonition became reality. Many people even started to complain about Werther God's overestimation of his capabilities. Originally, if today's duel ended with White Gouda winning the Silver Cup, the junior mages of the Night Academy might be happy for the rest of Christmas. Even though White still lost to Dake in the Gold Cup competition, it was only a normal win and loss. It didn't rise to the level of the Silver Cup competition. Now that this matter had come out, they would no longer be able to use the argument that the champion of the Silver Cup was the Night Academy to argue with the Noble Academy. Of course, some people admired White's courage because of this. In short, everyone had their own ideas, and so on and so forth. After all, tonight's duel was just a Gold Cup competition, and there was no commentator or host. Therefore, when Judy teleported over to interview him, Dake naturally rejected her. Judy was unhappy, but she couldn't do anything about it. She could only turn her head to look at the initiator of the duel. However, White Gouda looked too miserable at this moment. She wanted to laugh, but of course, she didn't. However, considering White Gouda's current situation, it wasn't suitable for an interview, so she didn't add insult to injury. After all, Judy was such a gentle person. After Doc finished packing up the magic cards, he walked down from the platform. He only cancelled the Lightbringer summon and didn't recall the magic elves. When he walked down the stairs, the Meanus had already swum over. The long-eared rabbit, who was immersed in the joy of battle, only reacted after a while and quickly followed. The fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, who was holding the tree stump, was the last to follow. The three magic elves followed their master and quickly disappeared at the entrance of the contestants' tunnel. Then, when there was no one around, Dark Diamond was surrounded and annihilated by the three magic elves that suddenly sped up. Before leaving the contestants' tunnel, Dake summoned the magic elves that he could quickly summon and let them move freely. Then, he went straight to Professor Shi Erfu's office. A cool breeze blew by his ear, and Professor Shi Erfu's voice was transmitted to his ears. Although tonight's duel wasn't exciting enough, they had gained a lot from it. If the fourth person didn't exist, this incident would have finally come to an end. The professors would be able to relax and celebrate Christmas happily. The night sky was full of stars, and the shy moon was hidden. Dake walked on the dimly lit path, and behind him was the lively outdoor duel arena. A few minutes later, he arrived at Professor Shi Erfu's office and saw Ophelia and Hephaestus waiting outside. "Good evening, Auntie Brad, Auntie Doragon." Dake pressed his hand to his chest and greeted them with a smile. In fact, he was Ophelia Brad's savior, but after that, he rarely had the chance to meet Ophelia, so they weren't familiar with each other. Of course, Dake was very familiar with Victoria City, so he wasn't unfamiliar with Ophelia. After such a period of buffer, although Ophelia Brad's complexion still didn't look so good, she was finally someone who had walked out of a storm. On the surface, she had regained her calm. "Good evening, Dake. You're here tonight." She was grateful to Dake, so her attitude was very good. "So, what are you hiding from me?" Hephaestus Doragon immediately examined Dake's face with a sharp gaze. She was tall, and when she looked down at him with her hands on her chest, his heart trembled, and her fragrance assailed his nostrils. Dake had been through a lot, so he was no longer flustered in such a situation. He immediately smiled and said, "There are some things that Professor Shi Erfu asked me to help deal with. When the professor arrives, we'll know soon enough." Hephaestus Doragon straightened up, and her pretentious stern face melted like ice. Then, she suddenly asked something that was completely unrelated to the current situation. "By the way, I heard that you've already sent an invitation to Panduola's ball?" Dake's body froze, and his expression stiffened slightly. Then, he calmly and courteously said, "Yes, Senior Panduola has agreed." "You little brat." Hephaestus shook her head and said, "I also heard that last Christmas, it was Panduola who invited you? How can a girl invite a boy? Be careful next time." Dake. Oh. With this small interlude, Ophelia Bradd's attitude was even more relaxed. The three of them chatted in a low voice for a while, and finally, Professor Shi Erfu appeared. "Come in." Professor Shi Erfu had already entered the office and opened the door from the inside. Dake walked behind him, and when he entered, he realized that there were many more people in the office than he had expected. First of all, White Gouda was naturally among them. Secondly, Professor Mitya and Sister Kalyen were also inside. To Dake's surprise, Olga and Eve were also there. He stepped over the threshold, closed the door, and locked it. When the door was locked, a gust of aura wafted over. Professor Shi Erfu had set up a wind barrier, and the entire office became a private room. "Everyone, have some tea." Professor Shi Erfu gestured for everyone to sit down and picked up the teacups. "Happy Lantern Festival. It's a bit short today. I'll think of a way to connect it." You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.